We've started.
Okay, the special meeting of the Finance Administration and Audit Committee will now come to order. We are convened at 5:31 Mountain Daylight Time on May 11th, 2021. I would respectfully ask everyone to mute yourselves unless you're recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Under our current COVID-19 circumstances, we are conducting official meetings of the RTD board remotely. These meetings are held via Zoom and are audio and video recorded. These, along with the unofficial minutes of the meeting, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website at rtd-denver.com on the board of directors page, which is located at the bottom of the main page. Directors and members of staff, if you would like to be acknowledged, I ask you to please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you. Those participating by phone may press *9. To toggle your mute setting, please press *6. We will not be taking public comment during this meeting, but we will be taking public comment immediately after this meeting when we convene our regularly scheduled board meeting later this evening. So that would be the opportunity for the public to provide comment. I'd like to begin the meeting with a short safety briefing. Experts say that we will need to continue wearing face coverings and maintain physical distancing a little while longer, especially in indoor public settings. Although face coverings are no longer required outdoors, we do encourage people to be cautious. TSA has extended the federal mask requirement for public transportation until September 13, 2021. That includes in the waiting areas when waiting to board an RTD vehicle. We at RTD do require that employees and customers wear face coverings and are taking a cautious approach to returning to pre-pandemic conditions. That said, transit continues to be an extremely safe way to travel, and there have been no clusters of positive cases linked to transit in our metro area. Please consider getting vaccinated if you have not done so, and continue with good practices a little while longer. At this point, I believe we have 14 directors in attendance, and we're waiting on Director Rosenthal to join us. When Director Rosenthal does join, we will state that for the record. We have no action items this evening. We have one discussion item, which is the reason we scheduled this special meeting. Last year, we had a legislative audit that included a review of RTD's internal audit. One of those recommendations was to conduct a peer review per Institute of Internal Auditor standards. We had not had one conducted in some time. So we made a request in January to APTA to conduct such a review. Tonight, the team will present a summary of their work. But I'd like to turn the meeting over to General Manager, CEO Deborah Johnson, to introduce our APTA team and the topic. Ms. Johnson, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening to all of you board members and to those that virtually are assembled. I am Deborah Johnson and serve as the General Manager and Chief Executive Officer here at the Regional Transportation District. As you heard from Madam Chair in relationship to the most recently completed state audit, in light of the recommendations and findings that were put forward, this was one element in which, upon conference with the board, I suggested that we reach out to the American Public Transportation Association and leverage our subject matter experts within our own industry to garner a better understanding of how we might be able to capitalize and optimize on improvements. Recognizing when I joined this organization, I in turn also shared that I would be looking and taking a cursory glance at what opportunities that were before us. So this was serendipitous in the sense of this both came sort of in on a parallel track. With that being said, I want to publicly acknowledge the work of our panelists and our partners at APTA. I will speak more to that later at the conclusion of said presentation, but now I will yield the floor, to John Henry, who serves as the Chief Financial Officer of the American Public Transportation Association. And I want to acknowledge also Danae Williams, who serves as the liaison at APTA, who helped coordinate these activities, and just want to thank you all for your steadfast partnership in this endeavor. So with that, Mr. Henry, I will yield the virtual floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Director Catlin. It's good seeing you all. Thank you for allowing us a little bit of time to go through this presentation in reference to the internal audit. As many of you know, at the American Public Transportation Association, we do these peer reviews on a number of different aspects, a number of different fronts, internal audit being one of them. We pull in experts from the industry, individuals that work in systems of similar size, larger, smaller, to really get a much well-rounded value-added expertise. And that's what was included in the presentation. And then what we also did was, for this presentation, put it together to where it's also can serve as a reference point, as a reference document. So where members of the board, as well as staff, can refer back to this document with any questions or anything like that. And then as APTA, we're always here to assist our members in these efforts in this activity. With that, we can definitely begin the presentation. Ms. Johnson, do you want me to share my screen? Is that appropriate, or?
Yes, sir. I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
So you guys can control the slides.
So let me do that. So can everyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So as I just mentioned, this was the request of RTD to do a internal audit review. Now, as we say at a good steak dinner, let's just get to the meat of the presentation. We put together a all-star panel of individuals in the industry. Michael, who was at MTA out of New York, Anthony, who's in Greater Cleveland, much and great experience, and then also Elizabeth, who's here actually in WMATA in DC. So these systems, as you can, as you think about it, encapsulate what RTD is now and what it's actually growing and becoming. So these individuals have experienced and really seen a lot of what you all are experiencing actually at RTD. The peer review scope and methodology, I won't spend a lot of time here so we can just get to the meat of the discussion. But really, as I talked about, we put together a very strong panel, and we talked to actually a good number of individuals at RTD. I want to thank Ms. Johnson and Director Catlin and the staff at RTD. They were very helpful, very forthcoming, actually sent us a lot of information that we could review and walk through, and we sent that information back to RTD. We spent a lot of time on the phone and in virtual calls with a good number of staff and members of the team. So that really makes this process really robust, so you can really get some good information that's value added. And then the basic scope of the peer review was for us to really address 7 basic fundamental questions, if you will. And those 7 questions are presented here. So what we tried to do in the report was address each individual question, but at the same time, give you a reference point. So when you want to look back at this report, you can then refer back to the question and the actual page that addresses that particular question. And then in going throughout this process, we really relied heavily on the standards that relate to internal audit. So the action items, the recommendations and things like that we'll get into in a few minutes are really based on those internal auditing standards and best practices that are really done all throughout the industry. And I failed to mention, actually, Elizabeth is actually the committee chair of internal audit. So her, as well as Michael, spend a lot of time actually going through the process of developing and fine tuning these standards. So you really had some experts on this peer review providing this information. And just to highlight, as I just talked about a few minutes ago, we actually conducted 12 interviews from a good number of individuals, all the way from the board level to Ms. Johnson, to Director Catlin, also other members of the board, to a number of members of the senior management team, as well as the external auditor. And this really helped us get a full picture of the assessment, what the need is, and then also talking about what our recommendations will be and should be for RTD.
Thank you.
Turn it over to Mike, who will begin the process to talk about the standards, as well as get in more detail in reference to our recommendations. Mike?
Well, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to be in Denver, at least virtually. So better this way than any other way. So, the question you all had is, what standards does your internal audit department use? Well, we needed standards to do this review as well. And there's two worldwide standards that are acceptable. Number one, the International Professional Practice Framework by the Institute of Internal Auditors. They are called the standards, called the Red Book, for those who heard it, that name. And then there's a quality assessment manual that also spells out the way that you would do a quality assurance review, which was one of your 7 questions that you had. How was adherence to the standards within the department? So those are the standards that we use in order to do our assessment. Next, John. So let me start with the conclusion, right? And then presentation will take you to, the basis for that. And we spent a lot of time, as John said, looking at documents, looking at records, talking to people, talking to the internal audit staff as well, which is critical in any quality assurance review that you would do. But in our opinion, the team's opinion, RTD Internal Audit Division does not comply with the Institute of Internal Auditors standards that I just showed you on the page before. What doesn't it adhere to? Well, independence and structure, and we'll get into that. Risk assessment. I've seen that in the minutes of your board meetings. How do you pick the audits that you do? Do you have enough people? What was the basis of picking these audits? Risk assessment of the enterprise level we had issues with, and we'll get into that. The audit work itself, an internal audit department, if you think about what it does, it spends about 75% of its work doing audits. That's why you call it an internal audit department. So when we looked at that work, the actual work done, planning the assignments, doing the field work, sampling, preparing work papers, communicating, writing an audit report, it is our opinion that it does not comply with the standards. And then the most important aspect of an audit is the recommendation itself. If you have recommendations and you don't follow up and you don't implement them, why do the audit? It would just be money wasted or effort wasted. Two of the most important standards in that Red Book that I showed you on the previous slide. Number one is internal audit recommendation follow-up. Meaning, does anyone care? You did the audit, you have the recommendations to improve the authority from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective. Did you follow up? And the answer was not adequately. Second standard, just so you know, I mentioned 2, was the quality assurance review, which we'll get into later in our presentation. Next, John. There's a great slide that Elizabeth gave us on our team, and it talked about, what's the maturity of an internal audit department? Because it varies from inception. I've been in organizations that created an internal audit department, and it matures, over the years. For a department that's been in place at your organization for the time it's been in, we came to the conclusion that you're still at not a sustainable level. You're at level 1, and you should be much higher. Those are the various levels. I won't get into it, but you can read it yourself, and it'll be in the report. But based on the information, records, people we spoke to, we see that currently there's a lot of way you can go for improvement, and we'll get into that and how you can improve your functions. Next, John. So one of the questions, those 7 questions, and that did come from the board and from the general manager. The first question was, hey, the audit functions performed by internal audit division as compared to other similar agencies, a benchmarking practice. How are we doing as compared to other agencies of our size? Based on the conclusion that we reached, the audit functions performed by the Internal Audit Division as compared to similar units were found to be small in size. Currently, you have 2 people working. We spoke to them both. You have the head of the department and you have 1 person assisting on that position. You actually have a budgeted head count of 3 officially on the books and records, but you only are using 2 right now. It's our opinion that based on the work that ahead of you and the size of your organization and the responsibilities you have, that that should be increased to at least 5 positions. And we'll talk to you about how you get there, but you don't have enough people of 2 to meet the demands and to particularly address the risks that you're facing, and particularly during these times with the pandemic and coming out of a pandemic. And what does that mean to you as it relates to revenue, expenses, and your budget, and particularly safety, and reliability, which are critical to your vision and your mission. Some organizations that we spoke to and laid out here, there's a chart that we got from APTA. We added Anthony, because he's on the team, the Greater Cleveland, and asked him how many he had, and it varied. I mean, take the MTA where I worked out of it. I mean, we did have 85 auditors, but most transit properties are around, from that 500 million to 2 billion, 3 billion mark, and that's the amount of positions they had. Based on benchmarking consultation with the team, we arrived at, listen, why give them 8, 9 right now? Let's give them 5, get them going, make them more effective, and then you could, based on your risk assessment, determine whether or not you want to go from there. But I'd rather you walk than run into improving or developing your internal audit department function.
Michael, excuse me, this
Sure.
is Peggy Catlin. I just wanted to note for the record that Director Rosenthal has also joined the call.
Okay.
So he's on with us. And I apologize for.
No, not at all. And please interrupt me. That's what we're here for. We love being interrupted. That means you're listening. Thank you so much. John, I just hit my page numbers. What page am I up to? Oh, 11. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth?
All right, thank you, Michael. So in terms of our next couple slides, we will be responding to the second question from the board, which was regarding the efficacy of the division and fulfilling its goals as stated in its board-approved charter. So in order to do this, we examined the Finance Administration and Audit Committee charter. We reviewed the RTD bylaws. We also took a look at the as it relates to the audit committee responsibility. We looked at the internal audit function and its charter. And what I'll do is I'll start with the information considered, and Anthony will follow on with additional information regarding the bylaws. So in order for us to determine the efficacy, we considered conformance to standards. So Mike mentioned earlier on about our standards. We consider standards that speak about the authority, the purpose, and responsibility of internal audit, which is standard 100, one of our attribute standards. We considered how the internal audit charter is expressed. We considered whether it was consistent with the definition of internal auditing in terms of how it performed its work. We considered whether or not it represented the expected code of ethics as well as the related standards. So just to give you a high overview of some of these standards, so that as we talk about what we looked at and what we observed, you may have a frame of reference. We have a standard that speaks about independence and objectivity, and that is typically achieved through the dual reporting relationships, which includes a function reporting to the committee of the board, audit committee specifically, and of course, an administrative reporting relationship with management. We looked at our standards 1110, which speak about organizational independence. And that what really speaks to is basically where it speaks about where the internal audit department sits within the organization in a place where it's able to, within the structure, that allows it to fulfill its responsibility in its optimal sense. And we'll discuss that further later. We also looked at standards 1111, which speaks about the direct interaction with the board. It guides the formal expectations around formal interactions as well as informal communications expected of the board. We looked at standards 1300 and 1310, which speaks about quality assurance and improvement program. Mike mentioned earlier on that standards 1300 is one of the most important ones, second to standard 2500 about monitoring. Well, this allows the board to understand how the efficacy really of the internal audit function. That's the standard to evaluate the quality of that function. And of course, we looked at our standards of performance in 2020 regarding communication. So if we go to our slide here, basically, as we consider the audit committee charter, here are some of our observations. So there is no direct evidence based on what we saw that the board and its finance and administration and audit committee charter periodically approves the internal audit charter that is expected in terms of its oversight responsibility. While we saw that the RTD charter was approved in December of 2017, we were not able to see evidence of this formal approval of the board. Also, the RTD organizational chart, which we received dated July 2020, it shows this reporting relationship of the general manager, CEO, and then we were looking for expectations in terms of functional oversight based on the charter. We also were looking for an opportunity to see whether or not the board had some responsibility over the management of the performance of the CAE or the internal auditor. We were not able to see any evidence of that, not in the reporting relationship, nor in practice. So that's one of the things we looked for. In our next slide, we also considered continuing with the line there around expectations of the charter. So in the audit charter, we did see some of the mandatory expectations. So the mission of internal auditing, the mandatory elements of the IPPF or International Professional Practices Framework was certainly referenced in the charter. But what we did not see, though, is the evidence that this information was discussed by the CAE or the internal audit manager, which is a matter of routine with the senior management and the board, again, demonstrating that expectation of that interaction. There was no direct evidence that we were able to see of this ongoing communication. We mentioned earlier on about the communication standards for formal and informal communication. We did not see evidence of this ongoing communication with the committee of the board, even though we had some documentation that shows that this is expected as well. According to the roles and responsibility of the Finance Administration and Audit Committee, it outlines in there that there should be an expectation to meet with the internal audit manager as needed. It even specifies to discuss matters relevant, of concern, of importance. It even talks about anything that audit may find concerning and to raise that. Maybe it's health related, safety related, or welfare of an RTD writer or employee. Again, that was expressed in the documentation. Again, we didn't see that happening in practice. Next slide, please. So again, also expressed under the roles and responsibility of the Finance Administration and Audit Committee Charter, the Vice Chair was also expected to have this meeting with the Internal Audit Manager on an as-needed basis to discuss relevant matters. Again, that was not something we saw in practice. According to the roles and responsibility of the Finance Administration and Audit Committee Charter, again, there is an expectation that the committee as a whole meet to monitor the audit activities, so the activities of the Internal Audit Department, evaluate the audit reports, as well as track the close out and monitoring of the findings. So tracking the findings, monitoring for full implementation, all expressed in the committee charter. Not something that we saw operating in practice. Next slide, please. So again, in continuation of what we found in the documented charters, the staffing expectations outlined by the Finance Administration and Audit Committee Charter requires another interaction with the CFO, the audit manager. Again, something that we did not see in practice as well. According to the Finance Administration and Audit Committee Charter, the internal audit manager is expected to schedule an annual meeting to meet with the full board, to talk about the audit plan, to talk about what's coming in the upcoming year. Another thing that our standards require, that we have this kind of interaction in terms of audit planning as part of audit planning, which we'll talk about as well in detail. This was not something that we saw in practice either. And in our next slide, we simply talk about some audit committee charter expectations, just in 3 quick points. The audit committee charter should include the following expectations: receive and review the annual independent financial audit required by law. We recommend that the board take appropriate action and make sure that that's available for as part of the responsibility. Review and receive the final reports from the independent auditors or any specified or special financial audit requested by the board or other parties. Also oversee the authority's responsibility as it relates to financial audits as well as other third parties. Again, making sure that, and this could include any third party that would have some responsibility for audit. So another thing that we would provide in terms of audit committee charter expectations. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Anthony to speak about the RTD bylaws and some of the best practices we wanted to offer there. Anthony?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Director Rosenthal, Director Catlin, members of the board, and General Manager Johnson. I'm happy to be here. I'm Anthony Garofoli. I'll start with on page 17. This is my review of the RTD bylaws. And what I did was I compared those with best practices. And within those 2 bullet points, these don't exist in your bylaws, okay? Your bylaws should include language to establish and maintain an internal audit department. The first bullet point, this is where it clearly states for the board, the GM, the staff, the employees, third parties, they should all be aware that there is established an internal audit department. That second bullet, recommended language, this element should be, this is duties of the board, okay, clearly stated for everyone. And for both of these bullet points, the expectation is we see them repeated in the audit charter. Next page, please. This begins a series of pages where I've compared the current internal audit charter written in 2017 with the best practices model as established by the Institute of Internal Auditors. And I won't go through each of these sections in detail, but what I want to say that there's the charter that RTD has, it looks like there was an attempt to mirror the best practice model, but there are certain sections that are missing, and then there's some that should just be updated. So some examples, and we can kind of scroll through here, Dina, if you don't mind, is that these items include the audit manager's responsibilities, the board's responsibilities, reporting responsibilities, quality assurance and mandatory elements of a quality assurance program. And then next slide. And then a periodic review of the charter itself, where the general manager, the audit manager, or the board can review that charter and make sure it aligns with the mission of the RTD. Okay. And at this point, we'll turn this back over to, who's this? 22 is Michael. Michael, you may be on mute.
There you go. Thank you, Anthony. One of the things you asked was, how is the division's compliance with recognized audit standards and practices? Well, let me just tell you something about the standards. The standards really it doesn't matter if you have a small department of 1, or you have an audit department like Citibank of 1,000. The standards apply to all. And the expectation is, and for your department of 2 or budgeted 3, you would have to have adherence to the standards. Some small audit departments, and I've been in the profession a long time, tend to say, well, I'm one person. How many audits could we do? Why do we have to adhere to standards? Well, you have to, because when you face a board like yourself, it's important that with a board and a one-person department or a two-person department that you have. How many departments, how many audits could I do? That's true. How many? A handful? You need to know which audits I can't do. And that's where the standards come in. And that's where your decision comes in, whether or not you're adequately staffed or not. Because to address risk, what risk are you not addressing? And that's what these standards and practices give you. So as I said earlier, this division does not comply with recognized audit standards. And by the way, those standards are the only standards in the world. There are no other. Institute of Internal Auditors are the only standards for the profession of internal auditing. There's no other that any audit department could use. And you should always ask your head of your department, what standards do you use? Because it can't be Mike's standards. It's not Elizabeth's standards. It's not Anthony's standards. It's Institute of Internal Audit standards. And how does that pertain to your independence and structure that they eloquently told you? Your risk assessment at the enterprise level. And I read your minutes, and which are rather lengthy, I may say. I had to do word search. But you had questions about that. I saw board members asking, do you have enough resources? Which audits are you doing? Why are you doing these audits? And I didn't see the follow-up to the answers to those questions. As I said, 75% of our work is planning field work and reporting of assignments. And more importantly, the documentation to support the audit report. You don't see the work papers, you see the audit report. What's the foundation? The foundation to the house is those work papers. You stand on them. You know, you have to rely on them. They have to be accurate. They have to be complete. They have to be good. They have to be reviewed and they have to be approved. And that was not the case. And then, as I told you already, audit recommendations. If you're not going to follow up on the recommendations, don't do the audit. You know, it would have no reason to do that. Next. So, you know, when we saw the plan, the annual plan, and time budgets are not used. So when we looked at particular audits, there was no way to know. And when you read report, is this a small audit, a medium audit, a large audit? How robust was it? What was the robustness of the planning, the field work, and the report writing? We couldn't reach that conclusion. Audits, the identification of that risk that I told you, one of the practices you would use is have interviews with management, but it's not the only practice you would use. You don't ask people what you want me to audit, what keeps you up at night. You have to do other things as well. You have to do your own assessment. You have to look at information. You have to look at records. You have to look at controls. You have to look at past audits to reach a comprehensive list. With a staff of 2, I can't audit a lot, but what was the basis of me selecting those audits that I picked? And as I told you, what can't I do? It's probably more important in your world for me to tell you what I can't audit than what I will audit. And that wasn't there. Time budget was not monitored. You know, you have 2 people, you want to be efficient, you want to be effective. How long did it take to do these audits? Could you go back and find that out for us? And the answer is no, we cannot. We have no basis to do that. But one of the basis of internal auditing is that you have a budget, because a budget is a project unto itself. Just as you're building a building or putting in a new system, how long will it take and what's it going to cost me? And that's very important for an internal auditor to establish and monitor. Your work papers, I told you, foundation for your report. Okay, as goes the report, goes the work papers. And we'll show you in a few slides the amount of work papers we looked at. I've done many quality assurance reviews, departments of 1 to departments of 1,000. I've never seen so many work papers lost in my life. You have manual work papers, but you have a lot of work papers lost, which worries me because that's the foundation of your audit report. And by the way, you could have an issue in your audit report going back 7 years. You need the work papers to support the work that you did. It's an important issue. You know, when we used to travel back in the day when we had automated work papers, you weren't even allowed to check into work papers. You had to almost handcuff them to your arm because they were that important. So you don't lose work papers. Judgmental sampling is a tool, but it's not, let's pick 10, let's pick 30. You know, you can't just pick a sample judgmentally. Today, and particularly in 2021, the automated tools that we have, software that's not very expensive, that you could use to support the sample you did, to conclude on your data. Your errors, your irregularities, your fraud is in the data. It's not in your work process flows. And if you're doing a sample of 10 on 60,000 items, you probably have a better
Thank you,
chance of.
Michael. Somebody on the call or somebody on the has
to
not
mute.
muted. Yeah, they need to mute. There's a secondary conversation going on that's interfering. So would you all please check your either your phone or your computer to make sure you're on mute? Thank you. I apologize, Michael. Michael, I didn't mean for you to mute. I meant for others to mute. You're on mute, Michael.
And thank you, Peggy. You're in charge of the muteness that we have. Okay, good. So it says mute on my screen. Am I still muted?
We can hear you.
Mike.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. But now it muted again.
Well, I'm not doing it. My hands are here. So if you have records of 10,000 records, 50,000 records, which you could have in certain areas, think of your ridership on an annual basis, you have a better chance of picking the lotto numbers than picking a record of a sample of 10 and finding anything substantial in your organization. Judgmental sample is a good tool, but it's not one that should be used all the time. You just can't pick 10, you can't pick 30. It has to be based on the population, the sample, the audit that you're doing. So you have to develop more robust sampling plan in the department. Next. You know, one of the things you wanted to know is how did we pick these audits? Okay, and you have to have a criteria, you have to have a basis. In my department, we use 5, Elizabeth uses 7, Anthony uses somewhere in between there. Such things that you would use is reputational risk, materiality, certainly, how much does it cost you, controls, things like that. And that was not used. You had no basis for picking these audits. It can't be a running list of items, and it just can't be merely discussions with management. Which, by the way, it's one thing that was done was discussions with management, which is a good thing. But if it's the only thing, it's not enough. Okay. And the audit universe, you're constantly adding to it. Audit universe is what should I audit within your organization, within your business functions, procurement, technology, revenue, operations. What should I audit? It's not a running list. We were told that I have a running list that I add to it. Well, show me what you've added and deleted over the years, and you couldn't support that. And then how did you pick those 10 audits, those 12 audits that you did from this running list? What was the basis? You just can't put them in a jar and pick out 10. You got to have a basis. That's what risk assessment is. And by the way, internal audit departments are charged with doing an independent risk assessment from the entity. And that was not done. And there's a standard, which I just went over for you. Next slide. Again, here's a list. And this is a slide that I use for my own audit committee. Wasn't made for you, but it just tells a story of what you would use to identify your audit universe. Management requests through the interviews is certainly one and is important, but you need to look at your strategic plan. And you have one. There was no tie into that. Your board reports, what financial data, which is a concern to you. I saw in your minutes, your discussions in your finance committee, how you really are diligent in your review of that budget and watching it. What organizational changes do we have? And you've had several over the past few years. And then what are your external regulators telling? We talk to the state auditor, we talk to the external auditor. What are they saying in their reports? So that culmination of those areas would give you a robust audit plan that needs to be documented and every year. Next is this just want to make sure this is mine.
Mike, so I'll take it from here.
Yes, go ahead.
So Mike mentioned earlier on in terms of our planning. So these, again, thinking in terms of the standards, there are very specific requirements around those. So in this slide, we show here specifically standard 2010.A1 that speaks about the requirement of having that documented risk assessment. The requirement here is basically, if you look at as stated, the CAE develops an internal audit strategy and approaches that considers and aligns with the goals of the organizations, the expectations of leadership. That's where that discussion with senior leaders come in. It is a risk-based plan, which means that it responds to the risks facing the organization and absolutely considers that. One of the things that we noticed during discussions is that there are opportunities with the RTD internal audit. They actually talked to management. What we did not see is the evidence of that documented discussion to confirm that the action was taken. So we know that this is happening, but we didn't see anything that confirmed that these discussions with management, in fact, are happening. According to our standards, the CAE should develop an internal audit plan, which is usually a list of proposed audit engagements with specifications of whether or not they will be assurance in nature or consultant in nature, the different types of activities that internal audit by definition would offer an organization, and the rationale for selecting these proposed engagements. Again, whether we're thinking in terms of the risk ratings of this potential engagement, demonstrating why it's important that they be considered, when the last time they were considered, and also considering whether or not it was a management request or things of that nature. Again, we had no evidence to support that this was occurring. Our next slide, please. So communication and approval, again, standard 2020 is one of our performance standards, which requires that the CAE is responsible for communicating the plan, the resource requirements. So Michael mentioned earlier on that you have that plan, you have a defined budget, which expresses the resource necessary. All of that has to be communicated to the board, demonstrating their oversight of this activity. Also, when there are limitations or resource in nature or otherwise, that is also expected as part of that ongoing discussion. The standards require that the internal audit plan, the CAE typically defines this activity, the scopes of deliverables, resources, outlines the approach, as well as be ready to provide periodic information on the progress made towards meeting or accomplishing the plan. Again, activities that we did not see occurring in practice. The CAE should communicate, again, all this information to the board and get their buy-in, again, and have evidence to demonstrate that this is not that this is happening. And we're hoping to see that as part of the opportunities, recommendations we've offered to improve the process. And the other thing is just to ensure that the internal audit universe, Mike mentioned this earlier on, these are the things that are typical within, not just for transit, but any organization. You look at anything that's auditable across your organization. What the audit universe would typically include in any organization, again, it would vary, but expectation is you would have this general sense of auditable entities, things that are auditable across the organization, whether you're looking at departments, functions, business processes, significant laws and regulations. The other thing would be like a significant area of risk, for example, capital project planning, vendor assurance oversight. I mean, things that are unique to the organization given the context, all things that are considered as part of the audit universe. And then you determine what area will be focused on it as part of any given audit plan based on this documented risk assessment that takes place. Our next slide, please. The standards require that the CAE communicate the internal audit activities plan. Again, we talked about this already, the resource management expectations before that. Before communicating to senior management and the board regarding the internal audit plan, the internal audit activities, resource requirements, all of this information are expected in terms of reporting. That labor hours, skills and technology necessary to accomplish the audit objectives, all things that should be provided, tools and techniques to be used, timing and scheduling, availability of resources and funding. Again, as part of the board's responsibility for oversight, that functional oversight, ensuring that the audit department has the resources necessary to perform its work is also one of the ways that the board demonstrates its management over management there. Okay, all right. And our next slide, please.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Michael. So continuing, as Michael introduced these concepts and provided to you some practical examples, we continue to review the RTD work against these standards. This is a resource management 2030. It requires the audit manager to ensure that audit resources are appropriate and sufficient both the mix of skills and competencies to achieve the risk-based plan and the quantity of resources necessary to adhere to address the organizational risks. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what because the CA must report on impact of resource limitations. What we were looking for is we observed some potential resource limitations. Were these communicated to management? Were these communicated to the board? We saw no evidence of this to support this. Next slide, please. Okay, on the proposed internal audit plan for approval by the general manager and the board of trustees, what was the rationale for developing the plan? As Michael said, and as Elizabeth said, was there a risk scoring? Was it done at the enterprise level? Was it done at the entity level, the department level? What was the risk assessment? Okay, and then communication to the board. Do adequate resources exist to attain the proposed plan? What enterprise-wide risks are covered in the plan, and where are risks? As Michael said, he's worried. We should be worried about what he can't do. What risks can't be covered by the audit plan? Next slide, please. And later, Michael will discuss with you an agenda that for board presentations for the audit manager. But these are some suggestions. They're embedded in these standards. So, these suggestions are to report to the board and to senior management, conformance with the IIA's Code of Ethics, significant risks and controls, including fraud. Moving down, frequency of and suggested content reporting. So it would be the reporting out on the charter, programs that are to attain the plan, results of activities of the audit work, risks and controls. Moving forward, and in that last bullet there would be additional suggestions about content, quality assurance, adherence to the standards. Again, we're looking for how the audit manager was communicating with senior management and to the board, and we did not note any evidence to support this. And then next, this goes to
Elizabeth.
Michael.
Elizabeth.
It would be Elizabeth. So what we've offered here for your consideration are risk categories that are typical in transit. So we've been talking about how important it is to consider risk at the top of the organization, especially as part of audit planning. What we offer here are some risk categories that are typical in transit. And what when you think about this, given the business context, whether we're thinking internal or external for transit, these are what we would see typical. So whether we're talking financial risk management, financial management risk, legal and compliance, reputational risk, safety risks, of course, that's most of us will say safety is our first priority. So that's always a category typical for transit. Service delivery or operational risk. Strategic risk, things that we need to consider. As a matter of fact, we were talking about planning earlier on, and we should be demonstrating with our audit plan that we are aligned with the organizational strategy, hence why we have to have these discussions with senior management. Again, another category that could be considered as part of the risk discussion and risk planning process. Technology risk, another risk category that could be typical with transit. During the introductions, John mentioned that I currently chair the AFTER Committee of Audit Professionals. More recently, we all got together, all aimed at helping create value for our organizations. We started to think about, well, what risks should we be thinking about given the current environment, especially thinking about COVID, and as we move into what we'll call our new norm. What should we be thinking through as a transit group of internal auditors? Here are some of the results of that poll for those of us that got together back then to think through this and offer this as well as for your consideration. So cybersecurity, of course, workforce availability and management, especially as we think about our reentry plans. A lot of expectations from our writers looking to see that cleaning is taking place in the transit, in the systems. Again, things that we wanted to think through as a audit community within transit. these are the kinds of risks that would change our plans, especially as we're thinking about managing to risk. Those types of considerations come to when we're thinking about what we need to do for our plan. So generally speaking, like any organization, risk for RTD are based on its internal and external context, its mission, vision, and core values, and of course, its selective strategies. Just a visual to provide some of the recent discussions within the transit, within APTA really, as part of that Committee of Audit Professionals. Michael?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So here's an example of what such a presentation would be made to the board or the audit committee on the audit universe. Once you identify the audit universe of auditable areas, then how would you break down those items? If it's at my organization, I had over 650 auditable areas, and what would be the breakdown from a low, moderate, and high risk? And then how did I then use that assessment to pick the 25, 30, 100, whatever number of audits I picked that I could do within my resources that I showed to the board? What was the basis of that? And that risk assessment that you see would drive that. Next slide. And then, as I said, these are the criteria that we'd use. This is actually the criteria that I used at MTA, organization that's $20 billion. Financial exposure, nature of the operations, the complexity, control activities, previous audit results, because we know entities like ourselves are audited by lots of people at the federal, state, city level. And management input was another one that we used as well. With that, I'll take you back to Anthony.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. All right. Earlier in the presentation, Elizabeth spoke on the standards, and this is a question that was asked by the committee. The reporting structure of the division is compared with audit units of other agencies, where Elizabeth was saying we noticed that you had a dotted line to the general manager CEO, to the board, and then a solid line was to the general manager CEO. So I'm sorry, again, dotted line to the board, and you have a solid line to the general manager CEO. Let's talk about some distinctions. First of all, we have some, those distinctions are mandatory elements within the internal audit charter and the bylaws as we've recommended. It's one thing to have those internal audit charter, but it's another thing to implement them. Okay, so I want to stress implement the audit charter. Providing that solid line to the board, you create an environment, we have an unbiased environment in order for the auditor to perform those duties. Okay, and then when you have that dotted line to the CEO, then you create an environment for the staff and for management, senior management, the employees, that gives some clout, and that the general manager CEO is going to support those activities within the organization. Next slide, please. I think I covered these slides, but go forward. These are what these slides are saying. So you can advance then to the next slide. And this is the actual standard that speaks to what I just said from the professional practice framework. Go ahead, next slide. And this is going to go back to Michael.
Thank you, Anthony. So one of the things you also asked, 5 of 7, the adequacy of the division report documents, including their format, findings, conclusion, and recommendations. I told you the internal divisions report documents, including their format, findings, conclusions, and recommendations, were not adequate to ensure they're in compliance with the standards. One of the things I actually did, I did receive 5 sets of audit work papers. We had 8 audit reports, although I would have rather gone to Denver to look at them. We FedExed them to me, thank you. We actually looked at the 5 sets, real work papers. These are the sets of work papers that we looked at. And I'll take you forward, and those are the reports that we reviewed, and I'll take you through what we found. So, no evidence of audit plan or approach for your particular audit. So when an audit was selected, regardless that there was no basis for selecting that audit, when you did do the audit, and one thing I may say, the robustness of the topics were pretty good in my opinion, and in the team's opinion. You picked audits. John, just go back a minute. If you look at the substance of the audits you're picking, they did pick police secondary equipment, bus and rail operations training, quite important as it relates to safety, controls over financial reporting, salary training, security contracts, small assets, accounts payable, purchasing cards, which could, from a reputational risk perspective, travel expenses, insider threats, which really piqued my interest, physical security. So they were quite robust topics. They were not picking some easy topics, which though is a challenge because if you're going to pick difficult audits, you need to do difficult audits and ensure you're doing them properly. Next slide, back to the slide, John. So no evidence of the audit plan on the particular audit, on those audits cited on the page, no time budgets that we talked about. How long did it take to do it? Audit program not fully developed. It's your roadmap, it's your GPS, where you're going with the assignment. You need an audit program, even if you have 2 people in the department, even if one, remember the standards doesn't give you an exception because you don't have resources. Purposeless conclusion. One thing we always talk about, Elizabeth, with every work paper has to stand on its own. I have pictures of the work papers. You have manual work papers. Nothing wrong with that, small audit department. But you should not have voluminous work papers. You don't get paid by the pound, nor do you get paid by the finding. You get paid for quality. And you can't have work papers with contracts so big that are included in the work papers, and there's no reason for them. So work papers that were perhaps 12 inches long, you could have probably had them 3 inches to be more efficient and effective. Remember, we're measuring the client, the people we're auditing, for efficiency and effectiveness. Audit departments have to follow such standard as well. We have to be efficient and effective if we're going to evaluate others people's efficiency and effectiveness. One of the key standards, no evidence of supervisory review. You have 2 people, you could have had that. Work papers have to be reviewed. Very shallow audit testing, I talked to you about that. How do you pick 10? What was the basis? Or no evidence of testing. Audits are not, you think you have a problem in your area? Yes. All right, let me write a finding. I'm going to have that discussion, but that's not a basis for developing an audit finding. You have to do testing. Audit objectives were not clearly stated. Incomplete work paper references, very hard to follow. One of the audits, Insider Threat, that was on the page before, really I took interest to it. I live in the New York City area. Insider threats is an issue, around the country. Was told that, yeah, we started the audit, we did the audit, we wrote a report, but RTD does not have an RTD insider threat program. That was what the audit report said. I don't audit something that you don't have. Okay, if you don't have it, it wouldn't be in my audit universe. I should go to the board and tell you, we need to have an insider threat program, but I don't commence an audit, do it. I don't even know what you would do because there were no work papers because you don't have any processes, you don't have a program, and then write a report to tell you don't have a program. I could have eliminated all of that. That stood out to me. And then, as I said, voluminous contracts, policies in work papers with no reason why, no rationale. Next. Work, and this is very important, the conclusions you read. First of all, I've read the reports. What are you trying to tell me? I read the conclusions, but you had facts in your conclusion. A conclusion is not a fact. A conclusion is an opinion. And what is the opinion? If you remember, I started off this presentation today with the opinion of what we found, right? That's how you do it, internal auditing. Financial information, no materiality. You had no basis for even understanding the findings because how much does this cost you? Materiality is important to an organization. Audit conclusions were in the background section. I talked about work papers were lost. You don't put audit conclusions in background. Background is how you do a process, not what I think about your process. And it was there, tick marks, which we use in our profession, that explain what documents, what evidence do we trace to. We're either not there, hard to follow, or placed randomly on the work papers. Audit work was primarily interviews. As I said, interview is a practice we would use, but it can't be the only one. Work papers, as I said, were paper intensive. Limited access issue was not developed. One of the findings talked about where someone that they were auditing said, you can't audit this. You have no access, which a charter allows you to have. Well, you just don't drop that. Or that's where you have to run. When Anthony and Elizabeth talk about communication to the board, you need to talk and you need to address that. Of course, I would go to Deborah first and probably it would be resolved at that level. But if it wasn't, that's where that dotted line comes in, the importance of it. You go to the audit committee to get you the access that I need. I stand on the charter. I'm only as good as my charter. And limited access in our world is not a good thing. as I said, very good audit objectives, but your work did not provide the opinions that were reached or the basis of it. In fact, objectives changed from your audit plan that I talked about to the objective in the report. The objective has to be the same. What I started to do and what I completed has to match. You don't change objectives at the end of the audit. In fact, you never change the objective. And the last item, let me just move the screen. No correlation with the audit program steps. If you had one and you didn't over the time, as I said, why did you, what work did you do to reach that conclusion or to prove that the audit work was sufficient? Sufficiency is a very important standard in our world. Next, I just want to check what page I'm on. I talked about the plan and the budgets. You have to, just as if you get work done in your own house or on your car, you would ask the mechanic or the person fixing your house, how long is it going to take? I think you should have the same question on an audit. How long is this going to take? What's the substantiveness of that audit? What can we do within reason? And there was no evidence to support that. Your internal audit reports, those 8 documents that the entire team reviewed, because we received them digitally. No overall conclusions sometimes in your audit reports. It's one of the standards. One of the standards requires audit reports to have 5 elements. One of the elements is the audit conclusion. It's not there. A lot of times you didn't have within a particular audit issue, a finding, we call it. Nicer word is issue. Criteria, your standard that you use. Our standard, it was the Institute of Internal Auditors standards. You had a standard. What's your conclusion? Impact, who cares? Why are you telling me this? A lot of those reports I couldn't really decipher, and I don't know how you do. What are you trying to tell me? You're telling me something's wrong, but I have no basis to measure impact. And one of the things the auditor has to do is provide that measurement for you, which is the who cares question. Why do I care about this? Why are you writing this? Management response, as I said, I've never seen an organization in my 40 years of auditing where management disagreed with findings by the time it was in an audit report. It just doesn't happen. You vet findings as you go along the audit process with the person you're auditing. If there's an issue, you escalate it. And yes, you escalate it to the audit committee during the audit. You don't write at the end, I can't get agreement, and then just leave it at that. So a lot of your reports had partially disagrees with no audit comment or no evidence of resolution, which is not a good thing, and financial information not provided. One thing I'll let you know, we follow the standards. This was an audit. This was an audit of your audit department. That's what a quality assurance review is. So since we follow the standards, Elizabeth, Anthony, and myself went over all these issues with your head auditor, and she agreed to them all. Okay. You should know that, all right? Because the severity of these issues, I think you'd want to know what was the response. And the response was, you're correct, and we agree, and we got to do a better job. 46, John, who is that?
Still you, Mike.
Still me? Okay. Well, we got more.
Yep.
So I talked to this already, how your draft and final report objectives change. If I hit resistance, on an audit, because you have a climate, you talk about COSO and you talk about the control environment and what's the attitude of internal audit within the organization. If I have resistance, which I think you do to some degree, well, I don't change audit objective to lessen the resistance. I told you, you don't change audit objective. You start off with it, it's in concrete, and you stick with it for your audit report, but you don't change it because I hit resistance in my audit process. You just don't drop all findings. I had a draft report with many findings, and then I saw the final report. There was no findings. Well, what happened to them? Did someone hit delete by accident, or were they dropped intentionally? I don't know, but you have to, if you are eliminating issues, tell why. You do. No dates on audit reports. I wanted that. Why is that important? Seems silly. Well, I wanted to know. I knew when your planning memo was. I'd like to know how long this audit took. Was it 2 months, 6 months, a day? I don't know. And I still don't know. Audit recommendations were not actionable. We recommend that. That's how you write an audit recommendation. We recommend that you do something. We recommend that you prepare a reconciliation. We recommend that you issue a policy. We recommend that you ensure timesheets are improved. But your recommendations were not actionable, which make them very difficult to follow up on. But nonetheless, they weren't followed up on. And your scope and objectives, as I said, did not match the conclusion. You know, what you started out to do, I want to ensure what timesheets approved based on the results of audit work performed, timesheets were or were not approved. Your conclusions didn't state that. They didn't address your objective, which there's no evidence why that occurred. Let's go to, and this is my last slide. So the results of the audit engagements, you know, including the information, has to have the quality of that information, protocol, in case of errors, omissions. How did I do the audit? It wasn't there. So your standard 24, you weren't in compliance with because you didn't properly communicate the results of the audits that you did. And so it's definitely an area you need an improvement. Next, 48. You know, this was a good question, sensitive question, but nonetheless, a question that needed to be asked. What's the current knowledge, skills, and abilities of the audit division employees? And hey, can you give us assessment of any technical knowledge needed to perform internal audits? IT audits in particular. Well, the three of us, we did speak to the head of your audit department, and we talked to the person that is doing the audits as well. In our opinion, in my opinion, was the knowledge there? Yes. Your head auditor has a good certification. It's not the certified internal auditor, but nonetheless, it's a certified information system auditor, and you just don't back into that test. You know, that's a rigorous exam. So it tells me the person has some knowledge. And could I talk to your CAE about internal auditing? Absolutely. Could I talk to her about the standards? Absolutely. In fact, she knew the standards, but she also knew she wasn't complying with the standards, which we have an issue with application of those standards, not knowledge of the standards. But application is really important. You know, I could talk to you about bowling, but I got to throw the ball, you know, and I got to get some strikes down the road, right? So I think where improvement is needed here, which states about results of your question 3 and 5, that while the CAE is aware of your standards and aware of the Institute of Internal Auditing standards, the application and adherence of that standards is in need of improvement. And next, John.
All right, so thank you, Mike. I will take it here with our quality assurance improvement program. So standard 1300, which we've talked about at least a couple times already, is one that is truly important. When you think about who audits the auditors, well, this standard gives you that information. So one of the 10 core principles of the professional practice of internal auditing is that expectation to drive quality and continuous improvement. This standard allows us to do that. So by the standards, the CAE is required and is responsible for implementing a quality assurance and improvement program. Standard 1300 expresses exactly how we do that. It speaks about the requirements of the quality and assurance program. It speaks about the requirements for an internal assessment or expectations of this ongoing practice for quality to ensure quality throughout the audit. And then it also speaks about the expectation for an external assessment, which by standard, one is required every 5 years. So that is the QARP program in a nutshell. Of course, there are expectations to report the results of these assessments, whether it's internal or external to the board as deemed appropriate. There's also expectations to disclose to the board when we find ourselves out of compliance or out of conformance rather, with expectation of the standards and other things there. So we wanted to share that. The charter would typically carry this information as well, requiring that this QARP program be implemented. I believe Anthony mentioned some of that earlier on. And also the CAE has responsibility to continue to evaluate the internal audit function for effectiveness, ensuring as well for your own self that we're meeting expectations of our clients or value as defined by our clients or the internal business partners. Typically, the CAE would develop matrix that would help evaluate efficiency and effectiveness. Some of what Mike mentioned earlier on about budgets for projects, while you are evaluating whether or not you are executing the audit in accordance to the defined budget to demonstrate efficiency. That's one way to do that, reporting that out really to the board so that the board can also make that determination. The CAE may also employ tools like a survey to ensure feedback is coming from the clients to make sure that we're meeting these expectations as part of performing the audit. There are other opportunities to evaluate quality along the way. Some of the things that we did not see or evidence to support was happening with the QARP program in itself or some of the elements defined within. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we wanted to mention to the committee about suggestions for the committee agenda. An audit committee agenda would typically include things that are outlined. In order to fulfill its oversight responsibilities, the audit committee would have these discussions, reviews of results of the work or outputs of the work, ensures that there are open sessions to address matters. Sometimes there are closed sessions where sensitive matters may be things that are deemed sensitive from a safety perspective, cybersecurity matters, things that are clearly confidential can be discussed within those. Typically, you would see an audit committee agenda that would allow a repeatable process and a trackable process as well. So some of the recurring agenda items we offer for your consideration here are approval of minutes as natural course, approval of the committee work plan, which helps the committee stay on task in terms of what it tries to do over the year. A lot of the expectation of oversight can be baked into that work plan so that those meetings happen as part of that normal course. Follow-up items, typical for most committee expectations. Mike mentioned earlier on that there were some questions that might have required some sort of response back that may have been picked up with an opportunity to have a follow-up action item for the committee as part of the normal process. And also status of audit activities, something that would also require that communication or at least make that happen as part of the normal course, the expected informal and formal communication. Next slide, please. Again, we just offer additional information here relative to the audit committee agenda as well. We also talked about some things that are typical, so specific items covering financial, legal, operational, technology, or corporate compliance matters. Other things that the audit committee agenda could include. We know that obviously there are reviews of the financial statement audits, whether this is happening quarterly, annually, that is an item that could go on the audit committee agenda, typical agenda. Accountant's management letter report, we received that. Some of those items that don't rise to the level of a deficiency sometimes are presented in a management letter to the committee. Next slide, please. Other items here, again, we don't have to list all of them. We've gone over some of these with you, items that are typical to the committee agenda. What's helpful though is that having this routine agenda that helps identify things that are either more standard for the meetings or ad hoc is necessary. It just helps to generate, to drive the conversation necessary for internal audit oversight. And just some things here I'll mention on my last slide here before I pass it on. Audit committee attributes. We realize that this oversight responsibility is one that is, it's a heavy responsibility. I'm just offering here, in addition to the financial expertise and the strategic vision in terms of the qualities and skills and responsibilities necessary, experience necessary for the audit committee. We believe that the audit committee should exhibit these leadership skills that are helpful to demonstrate that oversight responsibility. They should be independent and approachable. They should lead their team skillfully, and they should also be courageous. And we've said also before that these are also skills and expectations, really attributes of a CAE that would also help drive an effective internal audit function. Michael?
Okay, that's me, Elizabeth, Anthony. Oh. That's okay.
Sorry.
This is the last question from the audit committee general manager, the division's practice regarding follow-up of audit recommendations. And as Michael said earlier, if you're not going to follow up on the audit recommendations, why do the audit? You're not going to be able to implement any of the recommendations. Okay. So, the conclusion, the division's practice regarding follow-up of audit recommendations is not adequate. There are no implementation dates to track completion or monitor progress. There are inadequate explanations to close out unimplemented recommendations or evidence to support the closure of implemented recommendations. There is no evidence to demonstrate that recommendation implementation status was presented to the audit committee. Next page, please. So this is a standard 2500. It speaks to, you have to have some type of system in place to monitor the disposition of results communicated to management. These can be paper and pen. This can be an Excel spreadsheet. There are automated systems available on the market. We've provided the audit manager some suggestions, to research and find what's best for this organization. Unfortunately, we noted no evidence to support that this standard was in practice. And I will now turn this over to John to close us out.
Thank you, team. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, just during this process, you all got the opportunity to really see the amount of effort and work went into providing this type of audit and peer review from Michael, Elizabeth, and Anthony. And then what we did here on the next couple pages was really just put the concluding recommendations all in one place. There's 17 of them on the next 3 pages. We won't have to go through each one in detail, but just wanted to point out that. So as part of the ending part of the presentation was really to put all those recommendations in one place. So again, that they would be easy to find. And then as you all go back and digest this a little bit more, this will more or less act as a reference document to kind of help guide the discussion for the future. And if you want, we can actually do a quiz and kind of ask some questions. Hope everybody took some notes and we can do that part of it. But we would definitely want to, thank you for an opportunity. And as APTA, we always here to help our members and assist in these efforts. And then as always, we have a disclaimer. But if there's any questions that we can assist with, and if there's none, Ms. Johnson or Director Catlin that come to mind right now, we're more than happy to, as always, just send me an email and then we can address, whatever you all may have or may be thinking of.
Thank you, Mr. Henry, and thank you to the team. I'd like to start out, and I'll probably also ask General Manager CEO Johnson to comment. But I'd like to start out by saying I'm sure there are many, many questions. And this is a situation that we are not going to resolve completely tonight. We have a lot of work to do, in my opinion. Fortunately, as Mr. Henry pointed out, the way this team presented their work was almost as a resource guide and a way that we can move forward. And I very, very much appreciated that aspect of this, that we definitely know that we have a lot of work to do, and we need to get started. It's vitally important for this organization and for the risks that we face. I personally cannot thank this team enough for the very hard work that they put in to develop this information and this report. And as hard as it is for many of us to receive it, I think it needed to be done, and it's a good starting point. If I might, the chair sent me a text and asked if she could be the first to speak, and then I will acknowledge others who have their hands up. I'm not sure that we could impose upon this team to answer all of our detailed questions at this point. I would like to encourage folks to really consider this report, develop some questions, and maybe we can assemble questions to ask of this team who has said that they will be here to help us as we move forward. As I said, I don't think we can answer them all tonight. But Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, if you would like, please.
Thank you so much. And um, first of all, let me just thank Elizabeth, Michael, Anthony, John Henry, and Danae for your incredible work on this piece. It is extraordinary. I just want to say to the board that all that kept going through my mind on this was, we don't know what we don't know, which is the saying that our new general manager says quite often. This started, as you remember, with the state audit, and we went before the legislature. And as I was sitting there with the state legislature, who had a lot of serious questions and concerns about our audit component, our general manager had already reached out to APTA to do a peer review, which is just so timely. And I want to thank her for her forethought in this leadership role. But I also think that what we have received this evening is a resource guide that will be up to us to review, to implement, and to make sure that as we move forward, we have a great time. And as I was saying before, with the new general manager and a new strategic plan of action coming in line, this is a clean chapter for RTD to move forward, to develop strategies and implement components that are going to serve our agency and our community for decades to come. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank all of you, and understand that this is not the only time we will be discussing this. And in fact, I probably am thinking that we will end up doing some kind of an ad hoc committee around this to make sure we do review and implement in collaboration with the chair and the vice chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know his hand isn't raised, but I would like to have Director Davidson comment a little bit later. But first, I noticed that Director Busick has his hand up.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. I concur with all the kudos to the APTA team. Thanks so much for all the hard work. You know, when I first looked at this report, I thought, oh my God, oh, yikes. But, you know, this is good. This is a good opportunity to really know what we need to do. And I also want to thank Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, Director Catlin, Director Davidson, and GM's EO Johnson, because I know you guys were really behind getting this thing done and getting it moving. And I appreciate that. It's going to be a tough slog moving forward, but I know we can do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Busick. I believe Director Deschel had his hand up earlier and then took it down and put it back up. Am I correct?
I did, yes. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who put this together. This was really illuminating. My question is, you know, I would, for lack of a better term, really call this a turnaround situation in terms of our internal audit and the changes that we need to make. When you've encountered this sort of in your various professional experiences, how often should we be going through a process like this? Or what are sort of those, and I know some of this is in the report, but really what are those critical steps to not just make sure we implement what's in that report, but to make sure that we progress from 1 to 2 up that ladder sustainably?
Elizabeth, this is a great question for you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So in terms of the standards themselves help drive this, right? We talked about those core principles of internal audit, because when you think about it, we express opinions and offer opportunities for others to improve. We always look internally first with internal audit. How do we demonstrate improvements? If we can bake into our process this internal review process, I mean, there's a path forward here with things to complete. As part of the internal assessment, we can track completion of some of these recommendations, I would suggest. But the expectation, as stated in the standard, is to do at least an internal assessment. That could be done annually within an organization for this evaluation of ongoing improvements. Some of the things that Mike mentioned in his presentation that we found that could be done differently, that internal assessment can help identify that early, correct it early, so that in preparation for an external review, which is by standard required every 5 years, that can also be towards a good result for that as well. So if you think about maybe taking a look at all of these items, putting them on a path to closure and evaluating that as part of that internal assessment that could be done progressively or once a year as part of the standard or the process, and then externally every 5 years. So APTA actually offers this peer review. The really good value of this through the Committee of Audit Professionals is that we are all not only audit professionals, we're audit professionals within transit, and the standards require that one be done every 5 years anyway. And so doing that with APTA, obviously would be one good thing to think about this every 5-year routine. But then internally, the standards also require that we do a review of ourselves internally. It could be done as normal process. It could be done as a standalone. It could be done as part of any engagement just to drive quality. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And if I may add, Director Deschel, if this report was presented at Elizabeth, at Ramada, at Anthony and Cleveland, or in New York at the MTA, the audit committee would place this on their agenda monthly, and you'd want to get an update. You're not going to wait a year. You're not going to wait 5 years. The severity of the issues you have, you want to know what progress is being made, and you need to set the tone by placing this corrective action of those 17 recommendations. I would place it on your work plan monthly, follow up on it, and make it the first item of your audit committee, not the last.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point, Mike. And I was also thinking about that. So that monitoring standard, it requires, I think we mentioned, we don't have a central tracker for all open issues, which is helpful to be informed in terms of concerns across the organization. This could be the first set of items to track items going forward.
Sure.
Items for internal audit, and then as audits progress, items that are identified in all the different departments could also be added to that tracker, and you can slowly develop that database, and as well as track those items as they become fully implemented and closed and validated.
And may I add, we spoke to your chair and we spoke to your newly appointed vice chair, and in my opinion, and not because they're here, there's no two better person to track this. They have an appreciation of internal auditing and understanding of it, and they understand the importance, which all three of us fed off of, because, as you know, we do love internal audit, right? So absolutely, you're well placed and suited to have that on your agenda.
Thank you. Director Deschel, did that answer your question?
It did, and if I may, just one follow-up.
I also wanted to mention, just for the rest of the board and for you, that CEO GM Johnson had a number of the internal audit standards volumes delivered to RTD headquarters, and we will have copies in the board office. So any director will have access to those. And I think that that's a great resource that we really need to pay attention to. Go ahead, Director Deschel.
What are some ways you might have seen well-intentioned board members perhaps get in the way of implementing these recommendations?
You broke up
myself, and maybe others might benefit from it as well.
It was a little echoey on my side. Could you say that again? Yeah.
What are ways in which perhaps you've seen well-intentioned board members maybe unintentionally get in the way of getting this moving?
Elizabeth?
I think it's the good thing I would say here is, again, because of the kind of engagement we've had with the board members, I certainly don't see, if anything, I think we even had additional requests for discussions just to make sure the information is well, decisioned, and we provide the details there at the request. So it seems like people are geared towards moving this forward. So I don't know that we would find an issue where people would get in the way of making this improvements here. Generally speaking, because the board has, in my experience, I'll speak from that perspective, the board has this oversight responsibility. Typically, there's a lot of support in driving improvement in what I've seen, specifically the audit committee. I know one of the things we talked about offered in our recommendation, the list of 17 that John had earlier on, was to consider maybe having an audit committee that has this responsibility. Typically, you would see them taking the lead in getting this done. So in my experience, I've not had boards get in the way of driving improvements such as this. And again, given the engagement we've had with the board members of saying, I wouldn't expect that here either.
And to add to that, RTD is rather unique that your whole board is the audit committee. We're recommending that you, as Elizabeth just said, establish a subset. The only thing that perhaps could get in the way is the volume of people you have on your audit committee. And when I read your minutes, which were 83 pages or 120 pages long, quite lengthy, I searched for the word internal audit and one line came up. Your audit committee could be mushroomed by your finance and your administrative committee. So you may be best served to create a subset of that board, as Elizabeth said, to serve as your audit committee, then that could drive these changes through.
It sounds like, which would be unusual for this board, also limiting participation on that audit committee truly just to those audit committee members and not to the entire board, which is what we currently do for smaller committees.
Cool. Well, even at the MTA, which has a large board of 25 people and an audit committee of 5, any board member could attend an audit committee meeting and is a member of the board. But your functional day-to-day or administrative monitoring of your internal audit department should be given to those, whatever number you come up with, 3, 5, 7, whatever number you think is necessary, but it wouldn't be the whole board. That could get in your way.
Thank you, Michael. Director Deschel, in my opinion, that is one of the things we need to work on as we move forward. So forgive me, I'm not exactly sure that, Director Busick, your hand is still up, but you've already spoken. Do you need to take that down? Thank you. I believe Director Tisdale was next. I also see Director Cook, Director Lewis, Director Geisinger, and Director Broom. So I think that's the order that I saw them pop up, but I'm not sure. Director Tisdale?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I do want to say what a great resource we have in APTA in getting this kind of review done by experts in the field, by renowned and extremely talented experts in the field, by virtue of asking APTA to conduct the peer review. So thank you to everyone at APTA for putting this great team together and for the phenomenal report. And there are many points to address, but yes, we'll hold off on a lot of them. And obviously the size of committees is something that we are separately discussing already with a view toward changing some of that process should the board approve that. And many other issues that you have addressed are being looked at. And obviously it's important that the state auditor knows that we've now taken this action to address the concerns that were raised in that state audit. I actually had a question that is a little off of the presentation you gave, but it goes back to the written report that you submitted in addition to this PowerPoint presentation. And in our packet, it's packet page 12. It is page 2 of the report that you submitted. And in the middle of that page, there are 4 bulleted items or enumerated items that says that there are also various enhancement opportunities based on our observations and comparison of RTD with other high-performing organizations, which included the following. And I just wanted to ask you about one of them. And I don't know if you have the report before you, but it's page 2 of your report and it's packet page 12. And it says, number 1, reviewing the board governance activities regarding board recommendations and approvals. Now, that was not mentioned during the PowerPoint presentation, the discussion that you had. And I was just wondering if there was anything that you could add to amplify on that and give us some idea of what it was that you observed regarding reviewing board governance activities regarding board recommendations and approvals.
Anthony, you have that one? I think you covered that.
Michael, either you or
Yeah.
Anthony.
You know, that speaks to the board bylaws with the, to create or establish and maintain the idea of that in the board bylaws. It gives some strength to the idea of an internal audit department. It gives some support for how the board will interact and support that internal audit department. And then to shift from the bylaws to what I'll call the codified policies of RTD. Within the codified policies is where the internal audit charter should reside after it's reviewed and approved by the general manager and board of trustees. So in my view, that's where that governance piece and policy piece begins.
All right. Well, I appreciate that clarification on that. That helps me. And I must say I agree completely with the observations that you've made. So again, I thank you. And that's all that I have.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. Director Cook?
Yeah, thank you very much. I had two questions quickly about time-sensitive matters, and so if I may go ahead and bring those up. On the small committees idea, if I understand you, just to verify, it's not just a matter of having the entire board as the finance committee working on internal audit. It's, in other words, we've been thinking about going to smaller committees, and just doing that wouldn't be sufficient, it sounds like, in your view, to assure full attention to the internal audit function. Is that correct? I just want to verify that, because we had been looking at these smaller committees, one of which would probably be finance and audit.
Elizabeth, you want that?
Well, again, usually organizations will think about how best to exercise their oversight responsibilities at the board level. So it may be different. But what we've seen work well, especially with the internal audit function, is to have that audit committee that has responsibility for internal audit oversight. As Mike mentioned before, when you have multiple agendas and with the responsibility of the same committee, this may get buried, as we're seeing, really, right? Because we have not seen that demonstration of that oversight for internal audit in its whole, either in interaction or expected reporting and information discussed given the output of the audit or the internal audit function. So again, it all depends on how best governance works in the organization. But we've seen internal audit as a function work well when you have the dedicated committee from the board.
Or it's been especially true in the past year with all we've been dealing with pandemic, the finances were looming so large. The second question, if I could, it's really hugely helpful to have the specific recommendations regarding the charter and bylaw changes suggested. So I wanted to ask you about one thing. On your slide 18, it's packet page 36. It says RTD Internal Audit Department Charter Review, and you've under the authority section, you outlined three things that ought to be within the authority of that internal audit committee. One is approve the budget and resource plan. One is make decisions about hiring, salary, promotion, et cetera. And the third is a performance appraisal. On the page just prior, in talking about the bylaws review, and this kind of gets to Anthony Garofoli's suggestion, it only includes two of those bullet notes, and it doesn't include the specific provision in the bylaws for reviewing the budget. And it's actually come up before. And the way our budgets come to us in kind of bulk form, they're not broken down so that you can see the amount that goes to the internal audit function. So I just wonder, do you have any thought, or would you see any problem with including that third element about the budget review within the bylaws as well, just to be?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's something you certainly would do. Your budget right now is $300,000. We did obtain it and talk to the CFO, but that's something that should be included in the bylaws. That's under the purview of the audit committee. And by the way, you would then, don't forget, the sub audit committee then would report up to the full board anyway.
Mhm.
But that's something that certainly would be included.
Okay.
Director Cook, as the CAE, I have a responsibility to budget for the resources that I need: people, tools, software, supplies, whatever that might be. The ability to outsource if I have to. I have a responsibility to present those needs to the audit committee, whether it's done as part of a larger budget or whether it's part of as an uploading through management.
Mm.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Director Cook?
It does. Thanks so much. And thanks again. This is really helpful and important.
And I think with regard to the budget, I think that is something that we have needed. So Director Lewis, please. And you know what? I apologize if I didn't see your hand raised earlier, but because your bookshelf is basically.
Oh, yeah, it's hidden.
Hand raised.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to see it, but so I don't know if I got the right order. But anyway, please, the floor is yours.
That's totally fine. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Director Cook, one of the recommendations for your first question is we recommend that an internal audit strategy and approach be developed that aligns with the goals and expectations of the organization's leadership. And so I think with that recommendation, specifically with the conversations that we've been having about the smaller committees, is the reminder for all of us to make sure that we are aligning those committees with the goals and expectations of the organizational leadership. So that's one. I had a question of clarity on packet page 11. Within the conclusions, it says number 3 in the second sentence, ensure the day-to-day supervision of the internal audit function falls under the RTD general manager and CEO, as the function reports administratively to the general manager and CEO. And I was under the assumption that that was happening. Am I incorrect in that?
Michael, would you like to address that?
Well, I think Anthony handled it. Anthony, what was your opinion on that?
Certainly, I can address that. What is happening is that you have a solid line to the general manager CEO, and you have a dotted line to the audit committee. That should be reversed.
Right.
And, okay, so the dotted line to the general manager, that provides the auditor the support that the auditor needs to work within the staff and management environment. Perhaps a policy that says, you're going to follow up with the auditor on outstanding issues, or, you're going to have an entrance conference, an exit conference, maybe part of some kind of a departmental administrative procedure. So again, that's how the CEO can support the auditor in practice. That functional line, though, that's the stuff we were talking about in terms of approving the budget, doing the performance appraisal, making sure a quality assurance program's in place, making sure the auditor is complying with the standards. So that's that difference.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate that. That's really helpful. And this has been absolutely sobering, fascinating, and incredibly informative for me as a board member. And so I appreciate you all's candidacy and you just giving it to us straight, because I think that's really what we need, especially as I won't babble. So it's good. And thank you very much for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a line in here that just comes to my attention. It's right after the conclusions. It says number 4, implementing an ethics training program and anonymous hotline. So I have a question, not necessarily about that, but about how we move forward as a board. And I would say that we've had some pretty good discussion about, the board being policymakers and the general manager being able to the general manager responsible for the day-to-day operations. And as I was reading the recommendations, I just want to be clear as a board member, like where do board members, what are some of the recommendations that us board members are responsible for versus the recommendations that the staff or our general manager are responsible for, so that we aren't, as board members, really dabbling in the day-to-day.
Implementing.
Yeah.
And we can give you that. We could give you, categorize each one of those recommendations, but just bear in mind, you're responsible to ensure the full implementation of all of those recommendations. You're not necessarily going to do it. Some of those are going to be done by your general manager. But we could tell you which ones, changes to the bylaws, staff management would perhaps be that conduit to achieve that.
Yeah.
And would do that on your behalf, and then you would review it and approve it. Elizabeth, you have anything to add there? Good.
I think Anthony had his hand up. Did you?
Okay.
Did you cover?
Oh, I didn't see it.
Well, Director Lewis, my thoughts were is that when you fully implement the recommendations into the internal audit charter, that charter is going to serve as a guide, and it's going to delineate the board's responsibilities, the auditor's responsibilities, and how those two interact with each other. So it'll become more clearer after that charter is fully implemented.
Thank you, Anthony. That's really helpful. So essentially the board just needs to step up, get our stuff together and get started. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Lewis. That's why I said at the beginning of my remarks that we have a lot of work to do. But it's good, and it's a fresh start for us. Director Geisinger, please.
Thank you. And really, I just want to reflect what others have said. Thank you so much. It's really pretty incredible work that you put together and a how-to for us to start all that work. And I appreciate also the work from Chair Catlin and Director Davidson and the GM. Thanks so much to all of you. I just had a question. A couple of my questions have been answered, but there was a slide about the audit work papers and audit reports that were reviewed. Some of those, they were pretty old, and I was just curious if there was a reason for that, or if that was just a selection of what you saw, or what.
No, they were generally you would audit in the past, right? So you wouldn't do anything in progress. You have to do completed work, right? You wouldn't look at audits ongoing. But I believe we picked the majority of them were from the last year or two.
Oh.
Which then would fall within the realm of doing it. The standard says every 5 years. So in essence, your population is the last 5 years. We kept it just 2 years back. And plus,
I'm sorry.
no problem. And we didn't want any issues with the pandemic and, being that you were virtual impact the ability of those audits. It wouldn't be a fair assessment of your norm, so we tried to look pre-pandemic.
Great. I must have been that wrong. So thanks.
That's okay. No problem.
Does that answer your question, Director Geisinger?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question, just an observation, I guess. As a former city manager and finance director, there goes my other phone.
It's a finance department.
But anyway, one of the first things I noticed when I got on the board was that the internal auditor reported to the general manager. And, I knew that wasn't really the best, arrangement. So I asked Dave about it, and he said, well, I don't like it either. The board just didn't want to have that responsibility, so they gave it to me to do. And that response didn't surprise me, because I had that same problem with the city council, where I suggested they have an audit committee and that the internal auditor should report to them and not to me as city manager, because obviously, you could have some conflicts of interest there. If things weren't going good, there'd be a tendency maybe to sweep things under the rug. So I do think it belongs in a small, just audit committee. Don't mix it with the finance part of it. And that the other thing that we do wrong as an organization is we've got these huge committees rather than small committees that concentrate on certain areas of expertise. And then the other thing we do is we change these committees every year so that there's no continuity to follow up. Now, to me, this is going to take 3 to 5 years in order to fix. And so you should have some continuity on the board. So when the audit committee is appointed, don't pick people that have got a year or two left on the board. Pick somebody that's got some time so where they could see it through to its conclusion. Thank you.
Mr. Broom, if I was reading a book on governance, I would read all those things that you just mentioned. So you're spot on.
Thank you, Director Broom. Good observation. Director Davidson, you and I have had numerous discussions about this, and I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussions, especially after this evening. I know we've been waiting on some action. Yeah, first of all, actually, Director Broom, thank you for your comments. I'm chuckling here because they all resonate. Certainly agree. And I would say that one of the most surprising things to me joining this board was the reporting structure of audit. And so certainly that's some material work that we can do pretty immediately. I'll start. I don't really have any questions at this point, and that's in large part to what I'll say the thank you for. Thank you for the specificity of the report. The report was very helpful. It was well documented. It is not overly lengthy, but it is specific, and that is very, very much appreciated. The comment I would just make is I think we're all aware. I mean, boards, delegate much of the functions of an organization to management, but one function that a board typically holds on to is the audit function. Managing, that is understanding, measuring, mitigating risk is critical, even down to the smallest of startups, something near and dear to me. So this is certainly something that we have to take on. I think it's abundantly clear we have a lot of problems here, and we own those as a board. And I think one of the things that will come out of this is we need a timeline, a project plan with milestones, accountability. Completely agree, Director Broom, with your comments that this is going to take some time. Director Deschel, I agree that this is I would call it a turnaround. So I just would say I look forward to working with all of you on the board on this. Again, thank you to the team from APTA. Exceptional work. It just how specific this is gives us a starting point, and I'm sure we'll take some next steps. And I would just echo the other sentiments that I think we need to get this into a smaller dedicated committee sooner rather than later, so we can put together a project plan that we own and that we're accountable to as a board. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. The fact that I don't have any questions, again, is very much to the credit of how strong this report is. I'm sure we'll have a lot as we put together a plan, but thank you for the willingness of the APTA team to answer questions and stick with us as we put together an action plan. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Davidson, and also for your dedication to getting this done. We shared an interest in this early on. I would like to see if General Manager CEO Johnson would like to add anything to this discussion, because I don't see any more board members with their hands raised. And I would really like, I want to thank you, Ms. Johnson, for for having the resources and the relationships at APTA to get this thing pulled together so quickly. And it's really to your credit that we got this done. So I personally want to thank you, but please go ahead and comment if you will.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. And once again, thank you to our colleagues at APTA for the great work that was done. I don't really have too much to add. As I shared with some of you independently and then collectively, I think we have an opportunity to course correct some of the comments that were made, i.e. by Director Davidson, as well as by Director Broom. I too, in turn, thought the same thing when I came into this organization and saw the reporting structure, recognizing the role of the board and the auspices over, risk mitigation and things of the like, that this should be a path taken. And that's what led me to ensure that we were leveraging a peer review relative to the transportation industry to look at what other agencies were doing, so we were in line with that. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I think basically there is an opportunity for us to level set what it is that we're doing collectively, recognizing that it was referenced that there's a state audit. We do have timelines before us. I recognize that rests with all of you, but recognizing the first step in which we have taken relative to having capable peers with subject matter expertise and a high level, of acumen in this area, I think this this will chart our path forward. And whatever I can do in my capacity to support that endeavor, I think is first and foremost to ensuring that you all can be successful. We all can be successful as an organization by discerning the risk to this, enterprise that we have here with the Regional Transportation District. So with that, I am happy, as I have been doing, to coordinate with Mr. Henry at APTA to facilitate any further discussions. I have been working in tandem with Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair as relates to some discussions around our path forward, which I think are germane because time is of the essence here. And if anything, as I shared with you all before, when I came on into the organization, I was going to turn over the rocks, and we're uncovering more rocks, but we're in a quarry. That doesn't mean we can't get out. And I think now it gives us an opportunity to step back and discern what it is that we need to do collectively. And with you all being the policy body, I think, if there's a willingness and there's an appetite to get it done, then we can all do it collectively. So with that, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, for your leadership on this matter. And thanks again to APTA. And that concludes my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I noticed that Director Rosenthal had his hand up, but he dropped it. Would you care to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to make an observation and ask a question, and then you went to the general manager. So I hate to follow the general manager, but I just sort of have an observation that, my sense is that a lot of these things, as we probably discussed earlier, but these have been building over time. Some of these things, maybe days, months, years, maybe even decades, to where these are issues that, and correct me if some of the auditors might chime in and say, hey, these are more in the past few years. I don't know how far back they went, but it seems to me, I'm glad that we had APTA review it. I'm glad that the board and the general manager asked for this review. But at the same time, understanding that some of this stuff has been building over time. What is the sense of the auditors on that?
Well, my perspective, this has been going on at least 8 years. It's not something that happened last year or because of the pandemic. This is systemic to the organization. So I would say it goes back at least 8 years. And look at it, your state audit as well would reinforce that. So may I, from an audit committee perspective, from a board perspective, I've spoke to many of boards in my time, and believe me, I know no better way to spend a Tuesday night than talk to a robust board as yourself that appreciates internal auditing. So you have the most important attribute that's needed, that interest, that tone at the top to correct these issues. And there's no doubt in my mind it will. But this is not something that happened last year. This is something that goes back, I would say, 8 to 10 years.
And then
I would add that it's both a cultural issue as well as a practice issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then if I could follow up, and maybe I missed something in the report or in the presentation and discussion, but sort of the urgency of which recommendations, should be done immediately, which ones, obviously they're all urgent and they all need to be done, ASAP. But if one takes a week and one takes a month, how would you make that recommendation?
I think that's a good question. Who's responsible for these recommendations? It's certainly not the entire board. It's not the board only. It's your chief audit executive, it's executive management, and it's the board. You have 17 recommendations, which would be implemented concurrently. A lot of them could be done at the same time. You may not complete all of them at the same time, but you certainly could start on them, and they would be done by those three principles. Now, I don't know your board structures. You have an office that would help facilitate your responsibilities, but I think changing the bylaws, I think management would come up with bylaws and discuss it with the board, and then you would, revise it and implement it. So management would help the board, and then management would have some that had responsibility for, and then your CAE would drive a lot of them as well. At least half of the recommendations will be driven by who you place, who's in charge of your audit department. So you would have that three prong effort to implement those. It wouldn't be one person doing all 17.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
all I have.
You know what, it is approaching the 9:30 mark for our guests tonight.
Yep.
East Coast, and I very much want to thank them for accommodating our schedule this evening. And we will be moving into our regular board meeting upon adjournment of this meeting. But I just would say we have a lot of work to do and a lot of questions that we will need to answer. And as we move forward with this important work, I do appreciate the offer of our guests tonight to continue to be available to help us with this. One thing I would add, I talked to some previous board members who were on the board more than 8 years ago, who actually called me and said, I understand you're starting to look at internal audit. And this particular board member said, I can't thank you enough because that is something that I had wanted to do. And it was more like 12 years ago. So
Good.
Michael, you said it was systemic, and I think it is. So
Absolutely. And cultural, as Anthony's added.
but this is a new board, and we have an opportunity to change
Absolutely.
the culture, and look forward to doing it. Is there anything else? Are there any other matters to come before this committee before we entertain adjournment? Should we take Chair Rivera Malpiedi, should we take a brief break?
Yes, I'd like to do maybe a 10-minute break only because everybody's been sitting for 2 hours, and then we'll reconvene at 7:40.
Okay, so we are adjourned at 7:31. Thank you all again. I
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Director Catlin. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right, take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, John, Elizabeth, Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Bye.
Bye.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will now call to order the Tuesday, May 11th RTD Board meeting to order. We're convened as of 7:40 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you are recognized to speak. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Since the Finance Administration and Audit Committee has already met tonight, I will not repeat the introductory notes Director Catlin announced earlier. That said, I would like to take this opportunity to remind directors and staff participating by phone that you can indicate that you would like to speak by pressing *9 to toggle your mute settings, and then on your phone press *6. Let me start with our civility statement, which is: colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, it is our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are the values that we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review our operating guidelines adopted by the board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Thank you. This evening, we will dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Ms. McManus, I know that the roll call has been done, but I'm seeing all 15 board members in attendance for the record. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. There are no retiree awards tonight to announce, so let me start by doing public participation.
Point of personal privilege.
I'm sorry?
Point of personal privilege.
I'm sorry, I don't see. Director Deschel.
I know that it might have been just one meeting where we did a land acknowledgement, and I hear that we dispensed of the Pledge of Allegiance, but given our current, still occupation of the land, I'm wondering if we could read the land acknowledgement that you had read for this board previously for the board.
Yes, thank you, Director Deschel. We actually were going to start that next month. So
wonderful.
We did take it through the executive committee. We talked to the board, which I'm very excited about. We're just doing the final touches to bring it forward officially.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me just say, if you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your hand, or let me start again. I'm sorry, let me start again in terms of public participation. So this is our public participation period, which is open to anyone who would like to address the board. As is our custom, we allow any of our elected officials present to speak first. And if you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. The staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. And if you're dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that participating in this process, you are being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will have to be submitted in writing, and you will not have the opportunity to speak this evening. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the board, please email those materials to the board office at the following email address: board.office@rtd-denver.com. I'll say that again. The email address is board.office@rtd-denver.com. During this time, the board will not offer comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Speakers, please refrain from profane or obscene speech and direct your comments to the board as a whole and refrain from personal attacks. Mr. McKay, do we have a speaker?
I see one person in the queue, and that's M. Scott Ramming.
Okay, Mr. Ramming, please.
Okay, I've got a couple unmutes. Are you able to hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Michael Scott Ranning, PhD, PE. Wanted to be clear, I'm speaking on my own behalf. And I wanted to start by thanking our RTD's new Transit Equity Manager, Carl Green Jr., for presenting the equity analysis of the COVID service changes last month. I'd like to speak on a related issue, even more retrospective, which is the passenger information signs that were first installed around 2009, 2010, in the hope that maybe there can be some remediation. So when these were installed, they were installed at pretty much every station in the network as it existed that time, except for the 4 Welton Street stations, one of which has since been closed. 10th and Osage, which had a symbol indicating it was a major transfer center on the maps from that era, and Oxford Station. And it seemed a little suspicious why those stations were chosen. So I had asked and was told that it wouldn't be cost effective. So then I asked to see, okay, could I see the spreadsheet that made those calculations? And I was informed that there was no such spreadsheet. And given several other excuses, one of which the signs might be shot. So I asked, okay, well, how many times have the one at 30th and Downing needed to be fixed? Never got a response. Maybe it was a difficulty of installing those in an urban street environment, although the downtown stations would be even more densely settled. And I also see that there are globes to provide closed circuit video data to the police headquarters. And even when I look at ridership statistics for each of the stations that doesn't have passenger information signs, I can find in your rail ridership data another station with slightly less ridership that does have a sign. I may be picking on Lone Tree City Center. It's not meant to pick on Lone Tree or to be an urban versus suburban thing. I want to be clear that I support transit-oriented development wherever it can be created in the district. But at the moment, if you are to visit that station, there's nothing there. But there are information signs, and I just find it strange that information can be provided where there's no development, but not at 5 Points, where which has been developed even 10 years before statehood. So I have to put forward a hypothesis that this past decision was meant to subtly convey to people who boarded those stations that their time or their experience of the system isn't as important as other riders, and in effect, they're second-class citizens, which would go against our values from the 14th Amendment, equal protection of the laws. So I hope something can be done to re-examine and rectify the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Ramey. Thank you. Okay, next on the line is the Boulder Transportation Connections. And can someone please state their name, who's representing this organization to address the board, please?
Hi, Angie. It's Joan Lyons, and I'm actually going to be speaking on my own behalf and not on the behalf of my organization that I work for. So as I mentioned, hello, my name is Joan Lyons. I'm speaking on my own behalf, and I am one of many RTD Citizens Advisory Committee members, also referred to as the CAC or the CAC. And I wanted to alert the board of a conversation that the CAC had last month during our monthly meeting. There are many CAC members that are looking to actively engage with board members like myself and are here to assist you with any and all discussions and decisions you all see fit. I know many of you already, personally and professionally, but for reference, I work in District O and live in District G, but I'm happy to work with any of you all as you see fit. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Joan. Mr. McKay, is there anyone else in the queue?
That's all I see at the moment.
All right, thank you. With no other participants in the queue, I'm going to close public participation period at this time. This evening, the committee minutes were included in your board packet. Are there any corrections from directors? Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minutes for the meeting for May 4th, 2021, I was actually absent, but it's showing, it says that I'm absent, but it shows a time for which I checked in, which was a time at like 5:32. And so just wanted to raise that.
Okay, duly noted. Ms. McManus, making a notation of that, correct?
Yes, thank you. We'll make that correction.
Thank you. I don't see any other directors' hands up. So hearing and seeing none, are those committee reports will stand as submitted and will become part of the permanent record with the one change. I'd like to now call on Secretary Busick. If you wouldn't mind, please give us an update on your work with the GM Oversight Committee, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We had a meeting last week that was very productive. We had our strategic planning facilitators present at that to summarize some more of the items that came up in the workshop we previously held. And I guess the bottom line is what came out of the GMOC are the strategic planning meetings that are currently being scheduled and set up, the 2 Saturday sessions, because it was the decision of the GMOC that we needed some more time, some more face time with the facilitators. And so those are happening, and hopefully what comes out of that is the end result of the strategic plan and evaluation process. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next is the approval of the board minutes of April 20th, 2021. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from the regular board meeting of
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, I got Tisdale as second and Broom as first.
Yes.
Correct.
Thank you. Unless there is any discussion, and seeing none, we'll proceed with a voice vote. Are there any no votes on the approval of the board minute meeting notes? Hearing none, that motion's adopted and the minutes are approved. The next is the chair's report. And I just have a couple of logistic things. As you can see, we are very, very busy, and we're about to go into an even busier time of our calendars, if you can believe that. So tomorrow, the board office will be sending all of us an email with a list of events for our calendar. Please make sure that you put those on your calendar. Secondarily, for me, sometimes I get a little confused about the Zoom links that are sent to me for all of our different meetings. And so just remember that you receive, this is more for me than anyone else, that you will receive a link either from Tai Shui or the board office inviting you to be a panelist on any meeting. It could be finance, it could be the board meeting, it could be whatever. You can add that to your calendar or however you want to do it. And then the day of the meeting, a couple hours, or the day before the meeting, they will send another one. But that Zoom link is specific to you. You cannot share them, because if you do share them, you're going to get thrown out of the link, and then it causes a problem. So just keep in mind that we're working on a lot of logistics, a lot of time, and we will be looking at perhaps having some meetings in person. And so we have a lot of irons in the fire trying to figure out. So please be patient with us. But if you have any questions, let me know, or let Ms. McManus know. But we're working pretty diligently to try and get everything organized in a timely manner. General Manager, would you like to share with us your report?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening once again to all of you board members and to all who are virtually assembled. I'm Deborah Johnson, General Manager and the Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Transportation District. As part of my General Manager's report, I will brief you on the following topics, 2 of which I committed to as standing items, being the agency's vaccination efforts, as well as COVID-19 response and protocols. Additionally, I will share a brief status on communications efforts regarding the FAIR study and equity analysis and the partnership that we have entered with Downtown Denver Partnership, Denver Ready. So as a follow-up to my report just 3 weeks ago at the April 20th board meeting, I'm certain you are aware that the agency has collaborated with ATU Local 1001's leadership, Kaiser Permanente, SCL Health, Denver Public Health and Environment, as well as Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. As recently as last week, in partnership with CDPHE, 120 vaccinations were made available for third shift employees at 4 RTD operating and maintenance divisions from 8:30 p.m. until 10:30 p.m., which included the Alati Light Rail Division on Monday, May 3rd, Platte Bus and Maintenance Division on Tuesday, May 4th, East Metro Bus and Maintenance Division on Wednesday, May 5th, and the Boulder Bus Division and Maintenance Facility on Thursday, May 6th. As you may further recall from my April General Manager's report, all employees were informed via memorandum from me in early March that they would receive 2 hours of paid time off for each inoculation. 700 employees have submitted paid time off requests for their participation at the Denver International Airport vaccination events that were held from March 26th to April 8th. 900 employees submitted paid time off requests for their participation in the Kaiser Member Self-Service and One-Day event from March 5th to April 24th. And 10 employees submitted paid time off requests for their participation in the mobile vaccinations for third shifts held at RTD divisions May 3rd through 6th. So with that as the backdrop, approximately 60% of RTD's 2,652 employees, which is roughly 1,575 people, have reported completion of their first inoculation. And this data is based on the incentives paid as of April 30th. It is still anticipated that at least 75% of RTD's workforce will be fully vaccinated by June 1st, based upon the information I just reported. Transitioning quickly to the agency's COVID-19 response and protocols. As you are aware, the Colorado Department of Public Health terminated the use of the COVID dial on Friday, April 16th, and local health agencies are now issuing all public health orders, and all metro area public health agencies are coordinating their respective orders. With that being said, all public health agencies are moving to previous COVID dial level blue. It is important to note the current 7-day case rates per 100,000 people within the RTD district is at 129 cases, which is above the stated level blue range of 36 to 100 cases per 100,000 people. Public health agencies will reevaluate the public health orders on May 16th and again on June 16th. We, as an agency, are taking a careful, thoughtful approach to easing back into normal as Platte, District Shops, Alati, and East Metro are qualified as outbreak sites. RTD will not evaluate moving to blue level guidance until the 7-day case rate is below 100 cases for 14 consecutive days. Regarding face coverings and physical distancing, the public health order no longer requires masks outdoors. However, there is an exception, which is face coverings must be worn while waiting for or using public transportation. And the Transportation Security Administration extended the mask mandate until September 13th, 2021. Denver metro area counties now allow private gatherings of 10 people with no mask if 80% of people present are fully vaccinated. Masks are still required in all indoor spaces. RTD will continue to adhere to its RTD face covering and mask policy on RTD property and maintain 6 feet of physical distancing. In regards to meetings, recognizing, Madam Chair, that you just spoke about this with the myriad of different activities that we have coming before us, as relates to public health orders, limits have been removed but requires face coverings and 6 feet physical distancing. RTD will continue virtual meetings as much as possible. Limiting the number of people in face-to-face meetings to 5. This will be reevaluated June 16th. Here at RTD, we will allow exceptions, training classes, new hire orientations with physical distancing and a maximum of 10 participants. Board meetings will remain virtual due to space limitations and the public health restrictions, and we will reevaluate for September. The exceptions to this include the Board Strategic Planning Workshop on Saturday, June 5th, and the retreat on Saturday, June 26th, which will not be held on RTD property, but at a local area hotel in which all social distancing and mask mandates will be followed. I learned earlier today that the city and county of Denver will begin bringing employees back on site sometime mid-June through the end of August, and state government employees are anticipated to return to their offices beginning in mid-July through mid-September, contingent upon COVID-19 case rates. As relates to office capacity, public health orders are up 75% or up to 75% of normal business or building capacity. And as we look at it, we're following current staffing practices until 7-day case rate is below 100, as I specified before. And when conditions are met for 2 consecutive weeks, we will begin bringing back office capacity up to 25%, then 50, and so forth, with alternating schedules. There's no change to our visitor policy, and we will continue to follow the return to work employee symptom temperature check protocol. So as relates to our vehicle capacities, I shared with you last time when we convened that we currently have our limits, capacity limits still in place. We anticipate moving to 50% of seating capacity for the June service change and reevaluate for September service change. Really quickly to round out this report, as it relates to our fare study and equity analysis, on Thursday, April 29th, I shared with you a memorandum that came from me introducing a white paper outlining the history of the agency's fare and fare programs, as well as an overview and timeline of the impending system-wide fare study and equity analysis, of which I have spoken with you about on recent occasions. A press release was distributed to the media on Friday, April 30th, announcing the upcoming fare study and equity analysis. Last week on May 4th, I was featured on KOA's Radio Colorado's morning news show. And also I interviewed with CBS 4, CPR News, and the Denver Post. On Friday, May 7th, I interviewed with the Denver Business Journal and basically discussed the importance of the fare study and equity analysis. Lastly, as it relates to this, at the Accountability Committee, I shared the significance of the analysis and the necessity of the study prior to leveraging any promotional fare programs in adhering with guidance that we received from the Federal Transit Administration. And then the last item I'd like to touch upon is Denver's Ready, an effort to welcome employees back to downtown Denver. And we've partnered in conjunction with Gary Community Investments, COVID Check Colorado, the city and county of Denver, quite naturally, along with the Downtown Denver Partnership, which is leading Denver's Ready. I participated in a media event along with Denver Mayor Michael Hancock and Tammy Dorr and other partners I referenced last Wednesday, May 5th, to ensure the downtown workers know that RTD will stand ready when and ready it is safe and they're able to come back. So, Madam Chair, that completes my report. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you, General Manager. Any questions for the General Manager at this time? Yes, Director Deschel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, General Manager and CEO Johnson. And this might just be my own missing it, but I was wondering if you could provide a bit more detail on what Denver's Ready really is. What does that really mean beyond a press event of, yes, RTD is being safe, yes, we want to bring people back to downtown?
Okay, so basically in reference to what the auspices of the Denver Partnership is and basically, you know, coordinating with downtown businesses to promote downtown Denver, what they have been doing is reaching out to businesses with the downtown Denver, getting commitments for them about coming back into the core and occupying business space. There's been 150 businesses that signed up, recognizing we're trying to garner understanding of how many people will be in the core. So then we can literally be ready to transport people and so forth. So that's the whole premise behind the whole notion about Denver being ready to, you know, welcome people back.
Got it. And one follow-up question, which is with the All-Star game coming up at the end in July, with an anticipated sort of rush with the mayor and the governor both saying, yep, we're going to be wide open, no mask restrictions, etc. How are we planning to address that given our current service restraints, if at all?
So basically, we are in coordination with, you know, Visit Denver and in working with the mayor's office. I've participated in meetings. We have information relating to what's before us. Quite naturally, as a rest where we are still monitoring what's happening. This does not exempt us from not enforcing, or I shouldn't say enforcing, because we are using guidance. But as relates to service delivery, we will look to see what is happening. That's no different from where we are right now in regards to the Rockies games that have already been underway. And we have been providing service since opening day, which was back on April 1st, April 4th. So at this point in time, we are in communication and in coordination and recognizing that we do have restrictions. We're still going to adhere to those because we are in the midst of a pandemic.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Does it answer all your questions, Director Deschel?
Yes.
Okay, Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great questions, Director Deschel. Question of clarity, General Manager Johnson. You said 60% of the staff has received their first inoculation. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, approximately. And let me qualify, recognizing this is a privacy issue. It's based upon the data that we've received in relationship to paying out employees.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I appreciate that. The follow-up question is that is that inclusive of employees at First Transit and TransDev?
These are our employees as relates to what we're doing because we wouldn't be paying our contractor. So I don't have any access to that data to discern what they have been, if they've been vaccinated. But let me be clear, all of our events have been open. So when we were doing the Kaiser Permanente registrations, when we were working in tandem with Denver International Airport, all that information was made available as well. So I can't speak because I don't have a source of data upon which to convey what percentage we anticipate that to be, but those opportunities were made available to our partners. And then in turn, when I talked about working with ATU, recognizing that they do represent some of those contractors, we have ensured that we've been providing information as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So they'd be leading their own vaccine efforts, the CEOs of those two agencies.
Right. We have also made our opportunities readily available to them.
Okay. Thank you so much for the clarity.
You're welcome.
Does that answer your questions, Director Lewis? Thank you so much. Second Vice Chair Cook.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to just acknowledge the fact that our board briefing documents have a really extensive vendor report and kind of an accounts payable roster. And just to the extent we're wanting to be more transparent, that's a big step. So I just wanted to recognize that, say thanks. They often, and it's kind of early in the month, so this may be it, but I just wanted to double check. We usually have a sales and use tax report and also ridership broken down for the rail lines. And I've learned to follow that stuff. And I just wanted to verify that the board documents will be augmented as we get further into the month to include those things.
Madam Chair, if I may, Director Cook, you're absolutely right. That's, I'd be remiss to say that's why I'm working towards ensuring that we have consistent meeting dates, because if we establish the meeting date, we would have the information readily available. But considering this is the second Tuesday of the month and we were just before you on April 20th, there was no way we could produce that information in a timely fashion to provide that to you. So yes, it will be augmented with the next board briefing.
I figured that was the case. Thanks. The second thing is I'm having people contact me. One person in particular, I think she works at the courthouse at 18th and Champa, and we don't currently run Metro Ride. Should I just make sure her organization is part of your core group so that she just returned to work so that they can make the agency aware too for the purposes of considering the Metro Ride?
Please restate that for me so I'm clear.
Yeah, we suspended the Metro Ride that runs along 18th Avenue, I think, and she had relied on that to get to work at 18th and Champa. And so because the courthouse there, it sounds like, has called many of its workers back, should I just encourage her to make sure that they are among that group that you're sort of keeping in touch with when you were responding to Director Deschel's question?
Point of clarification, you're talking about Denver Ready. Yes.
Yeah.
Or they could, or put them in contact with us so we have a better understanding. I mean, in reference to us as we go forward, we're trying to ascertain what level of service that it is that we need to provide. So that would be helpful if that would come our way and garner a better understanding to, speak with whomever is handling, employee transportation coordination within that entity would be helpful.
Will do. Thanks so much. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up on Director Deschelle's question about the All-Star game, I don't know about the logistics of perhaps increasing bus and rail service in and out of downtown in order to accommodate hopefully a lot more folks, coming visiting Denver. Would that be possible?
So Director Rosenthal, we are working through all of that, recognizing that we do have essential service to provide, to individuals, and recognizing that we also are trying to showcase our city. But then again, I'd be remiss to state that we are in the midst of the pandemic. And so as we look at this holistically, we have our teams working into conjunction with, Visit Denver and things of the like. And so we are assessing that as we go forward, and we'll make informed decisions about service delivery.
Does that answer your question, Director Rosenthal? Thank you. Okay, I see no one else in the queue. So our next agenda item is unanimous consent, and there are no actions for consideration this evening under unanimous consent. However, there are two recommended actions under the agenda tonight for listed in your item as item 12, actions A and B. And the first recommended action is a contract amendment and transfer for the Platt Boiler Project. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Oh, second, Director Lewis.
Okay, Whitmore and Lewis. All right. With that in mind, is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Okay, seeing none, that motion passes with 15 board members, showing Director Whitmore as the movement and Director Lewis as the second. All right, thank you. The second recommended action is for the ADA paratransit eligibility assessment travel training. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Director Williams.
Second, Bouquet.
Thank you. I have Director Williams as the movement and Director Bouquet as the second. Is there any discussion on this motion? Director Tisdale, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to confirm that the CAC had indicated to us last time that they believed they were going to be in support. Can we just have, for the sake of the record, a report that the CAC did, in fact, approve and recommend this selection?
Madam General Manager.
And I'm sorry, I said the CAC, and I didn't mean that. I meant the Disabilities Committee. Sorry.
So yes, as a point of clarification, at our last meeting in which we took this up, we had our representative, Ms. Carney, who was here, and she qualified that she misstated the date because they had already taken action upon this matter. Hence, that's why we brought it forward to the board last week, May 4th.
And it wasn't support.
It was in support, or we wouldn't have brought it in the first place before this body. So I just wanted to clarify that, as that was a misstatement that she later rectified. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I see no other directors in the queue for discussion. So now I'll call for the votes. Are there any no votes on this recommended action? Seeing none, it moves unanimously with Director Williams as the movement, Director Bouquet, and all 15 members voting in the affirmative. There is no executive session on the agenda this evening. Is there any old business to come before the board? Okay, thank you. Is there any new business to come before the board? Director Geisinger. Oh, you're muted.
Lynn, you are muted.
Sorry. I have a couple of things tonight. The first one is about the transportation bill, and the second one is with respect to the accountability committee. SB 260, which is the omnibus transportation bill that's in the Senate now, was in committee yesterday. It will go to the Senate floor next. BBMK, Jennifer Brandeberry, has been attending the meetings all along and representing RTD and monitoring that. There have been requests from Senator Winter and I think from others to kind of know where RTD is on this. And it's kind of it came up very quickly here in the last few days. And so we talked about it, and I'm going to turn this over to CEO Johnson here in a minute. But I think rather than trying to reach a statement of recommended action on the whole bill, part of what they're asking is, can we reach out in support of the multimodal provisions? Ms. Johnson, if you can be more specific about some of that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing. Can you hear? Oh, I'm off mute. Yes. So thank you very much. First and foremost, in reference to Senate Bill 260, which is, of course, as Director Geisinger outlined, is the legislative proposal in recognizing that it won't make everybody happy. It's working to address and incorporate many of the priorities, requested by stakeholders statewide. And while RTD is not a direct recipient of transit funding through SB 260, the team has, when I say the team, I'm talking about RTD staff, has performed an initial analysis of transit eligible funding included in the bill. And we will be an indirect beneficiary should this legislation be effectuated into law. Just for everybody's edification, when there was discussion around this bill in early March, response to early stakeholder and local elected official advocacy to increase funding for transit-related programs, the bill authors did raise funding levels for the multimodal program and the non-attainment air pollution program and the clean transit program. And so there is funding there. And while we wouldn't be eligible to receive funding for the programs, as relates to some of these elements, quite naturally, as we think about it in a holistic viewpoint, I would opine that it would be in the district's best interest relative to multimodalism to consider expressing support. So that's what I have to offer up. You received some communique that Michael Davies had put together in detail. And I know I've gotten questions from some of you recognizing that we are eligible as recipients from CMAQ funds. At the federal level, this in turn will enable us to go forward to be competitive for some projects that would go through the MPO, being the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which for this region serves as DRCOG. So with that, I will yield the floor, and I see there's hands up. Oh, and if I can just make this point of clarification, I know there's been comments where it's hard to see people's hands. If you click on participants and you open up participants, you can see the queue in which people have raised their hands in an order in such a way. So I just wanted to qualify that for some, because I know, with Director Lewis's hand and so forth, contrasting with the Bood case, I just wanted to call that out to people's attention. So thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. So Director Geisinger, let me go back to you before I call on other board members. Is there something additionally before I call on board members you'd like to share?
No, I agree that with what CEO Johnson was saying, the multimodal funding floats all boats. There may be some that we can apply to come directly to us. The other money that goes to our local government partners, can always help us as well. And I think, it could be that we put together a letter that Michael Davies and Ms. Johnson help with, I think there will be in House committee in the next week or two. It may be that someone testifies there. And again, you're not endorsing the whole bill as such, since we haven't gone through it. Well, there may be different opinions on some of that, but endorsing the multimodal aspects and the pieces that help transit and multimodalism.
So let me just ask this question before I go to Director Lewis. Are you asking the board for an informal yay or nay in support of the multimodalism so you can plan as you move forward because it's such a short timeline? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, please.
So could everybody just put their thumbs up or down if you're okay with us supporting the multimodal component of the transportation bill, which would give RTD the ability to access CMAQ? All right, I'm counting.
Let me just ask Ms. Johnson, is that what you see that we need to support those provisions that you were discussing?
So yes, as relates to expressing support for the multimodalism aspect, as I said, we would, benefit from residual impact. So I put that forward, recognizing that should be something done collectively as a board. Okay, everybody, hands up or thumbs up or down. Okay, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. So, good. All right, thank you. Director Lewis, I have your hand up.
I was expecting us to have some discussion prior to that vote. And so I'm actually going to rescind my hand being up.
Okay, duly noted. Director Broom?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm kind of disappointed. It sounds like this is like a 10-year bill and the state legislature doesn't do any transportation funding very often. And we're left on the very outskirts. I would think that we should have gotten at least some direct funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Whitmore?
Well, originally I was going to make a motion to support, but that may not be necessary. Just one other thought. I know we're being careful because the bill does have some controversy drawn to it, as any transportation bill does. But there are other aspects of the bill that I think are helpful to RTD and our fleet, especially when you look and wear and tear on our buses with poor road conditions and some of the other factors that come into play that are indirect, perhaps benefits of this bill passing. I don't know that it's necessary that we go to the full-fledged support, but it's just a thought. So I'll refrain from making a motion, and if that's needed later, Madam Chair, you can call back on me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Director Deschel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to state for the record that I am firmly opposed to the expanding of highways, which is contained in this bill. And I'm curious, I'm happy to support multimodal transportation. I do support it. I think it's great to see more people in this space beyond RTD. But I feel like we've been asked a lot to support legislation. I'm just wondering what a support of only the multimodal component does, because in terms of managing expectations, a majority of the funding coming from this bill does not support RTD and its functions directly, and is not for multimodal transportation.
Agreed. I mean, you're not saying anything that not any of us knows, but I will say this. When I look at the bill and in multimodalism, there is no TDM component more impactful than transit and rail, not hands down. And I think for that purpose, we, supporting multimodalism is really important. So I agree with what you're saying. Thank you. Director Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I I just want to point out that multimodalism includes first mile and last mile. RTD's put a lot of effort into work on first mile, last mile solutions to bring people to and from our network. So we are involved on that scale. We continue to be the regional transportation district, the bus company and the train company in the greater Denver MPO. And the bill, although it lacks, in my opinion, addressing some of the things that RTD does, overall, it's a step forward. And I think we will all find that within the 10 years, as we move toward correcting the issues that we have with single occupancy vehicles and climate change, that more and more people will come to RTD and we will end up being a major part of transportation in the future of the area, with or without this bill. So on that note, I will support it. Thanks.
Thank you. Second Vice Chair Cook.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to go on record saying I think it's not just sort of politic to do this, but I think it's good policy to support the state's bill. There are among those provisions that don't even seem to relate to multimodalism, things that will improve our ability to meet a schedule, just as Director Whitmore was saying. You know, I've seen that firsthand, having to avoid a particular stretch of highway because of its condition, adding to the time, adding to our cost to maintain a schedule. So I think even expanding capacity or improving maintenance can help the agency in the metro area. So I just wanted to be on record that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors? Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't actually support this bill, but I do think there was an opportunity for us as a board to maybe have a conversation about not just the multimodal, but maybe even the multimodal option fund, but also the revitalizing the main streets programs, because I mean, those benefit RTD as a whole. And also where the opportunities might lie for us to create some guardrails around this highway expansion. And so I say all of that, right? I say all of that to say it would be helpful if we could have these things, Lynn, our Director Geisinger, go through committee so that we can officially have discussions as board, as a whole board, to determine if we are going to support or not support a piece of legislation. It's my understanding that that's why we have committees, on specifically the Communication and Governance Committee, so that we can bring those things through committee so that we can officially endorse those. And so I'd love for us, and we've had this discussion previously, I'd love for us to think about what it might look like if we are going to be endorsing legislation, what it might look like for us to have a process around how we do that. Because I will speak for as one single director. I feel a bit cut off guard, and I understand that these things are on a tight timeline, but they don't give the opportunity for us to have some discussion. And I think like we owe that to the folks that we represent, to have some real discussion around what are some things that how RTD might benefit from this bill in terms of having discussions with other elected officials, to maybe change some of the language within the bill. So I offer that to you. I offer that to the board, but I ask that of you, Director Geisinger, if we could figure out a process in which we bring these things to the boards, and so that we can then have a process in which we endorse officially the legislation of any sort, this or anything else, because the endorsement of the multimodal option fund makes sense, but it still is an endorsement of the legislation, the bill. And so I just wanted to say that, and just ask that we, have a process for how we do these endorsements, so that we can have some discussion, because I do think we benefit from the discussion.
Thank you, Director Lewis, for those comments. I would just say to you, we were actually asked to support this bill before Monday, and we did not, because we felt it was important to bring this to the board to have a discussion before anybody did anything. But I understand your frustration, and everything's always on such a short timeline on these issues. At least that's been my experience with this year and how things are going through in legislation. I would just like to say that I too feel very conflicted.
If I just might, because I think it's important. Our language is important. I'm actually not frustrated. I'm not frustrated at all. It's just a question around process. Like if there's a process that we might be able to develop so that in the future, when we have these asks that are coming from other electeds or from other legislative bodies or other policy-making bodies, that we all understand as a board what the process is and what the expectation is for each of us. And it gives us an opportunity to have some discussion.
No, duly noted. I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that it appears like whenever we get these requests, it's on such a short turnaround that it becomes problematic. And I think you're exactly right. We do need to look at process and timelines about that stuff. But the one piece that I would like to say before I turn it back over to Director Geisinger is that RTD in our letter of support really needs to state the fact that we are the largest transit agency in the state of Colorado, representing over 3 million Coloradoans, number one. And number two, we should be acknowledged as that somewhere in the bill. With that, I'll just turn it over back to you, Director Geisinger.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. We have a process where Michael Davies, our new government relations person, and Ms. Johnson and Ms. Tanelis and Troy Whitmore and I meet with our lobbyists by phone call on Tuesday morning and are brought up to speed and we try to bring these forward. I don't think there's a communication and government relations committee meeting scheduled for over a month. This was long anticipated. What's going to be in the transportation bill? What's going to be in the transportation bill? And then, as I'm sure everybody knows, it was introduced last Tuesday in a press conference that was really the first time people saw it. And then as the chair said, on Thursday, we were asked if we could have somebody testify on Monday. We said, no, we need to at least talk to the board. So it really is, it will go through committee next week. They're trying to get out of the Capitol by the end of this month. I don't know that they'll do that. I hear you. And, it may be that having small committees can help to solve that problem because it will be a group that can do a first round and then bring it. It's just really, once you get into session, some of these things hit very quickly, and this one really did. So I get what you're saying, Bill. I hear you and I agree.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't think the solution is the small committees, although I am in support of that if we do that the right way. I think the solution is just us thinking about what a process could look like. We have within our arsenal the opportunity to call a special board meeting, right? If it's one topic, it's 15 minutes. We can all hop on a Zoom and make it happen. And so I hope what you're hearing from me, and I hope what the board is hearing, is that I don't care what position that we take for legislation, and I understand that timelines are quick. The ask is that we just have a process for how we do our business.
I got it. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Director Lewis. Director Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to pretty much ditto what Director Lewis was saying, and I do, get that, it's good to have a good process, but then I also hear what everybody else is saying. With these things happen very fast at the legislature. They're now on the 89th day, 90th day of the session, and so these things do go quickly. Sadly, I share the disappointment among some that it would have been much more preferable to have some of the funding come to projects that RTD is doing. Such innovation that we see coming out of RTD right now, pilot projects, plans, and things like that are really underway that I wish would be getting more recognition and potentially some assistance in expanding. However, unfortunately, the legislature did not see fit to do that. And if I were to be a betting man, I would say that's probably a purposeful slight. And I will end it there.
All right, any other comments from any other directors? Did I hear something? Okay, seeing none. Is there any other business to come before this board this evening?
Yes. I have
Yes,
one.
Director, oh, I'm sorry, Director, or First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you. From the Accountability Committee, first I wanted to kind of give you an update on the schedule that they discussed on Monday and what's coming, and then talk about a proposal that is starting to be talked about in the Governance Subcommittee. They're reaching the end of their work. Their meetings next week are the final meetings of the three subcommittees, Governance, Operations, and Finance. They're putting together draft recommendations on a broad range of topics, the local service councils that we've discussed, partnerships, Northwest Rail, fares and passes, use of COVID relief funds, performance metrics. Ms. Johnson and Director Whitmore and I and several staff members, our CFO and some of the planning staff have been attending those and commenting. I think it's been very helpful to have Ms. Johnson responding and giving feedback to the board, and we've been doing as well. So they will be finishing up. They will have a meeting of the Accountability Committee. There may be one more at the end of this month. On June 14th, they will be having the public hearing that's required in the original proposal for the Accountability Committee. And they will be taking that public feedback back and making final decisions at a meeting on June 28th. Both of those are at 8:30 a.m. on Mondays. And if you can, I think they'll be interesting. We're not required. And then what happens after that is that it comes to RTD. With 45 days, the board responds as to what either accepting the recommendations or stating reasons why they do not accept the recommendations. And it comes from the board, but obviously we'll be relying on staff for many of those. So June 28th, they will reach final decisions. We'll have 45 days to respond. And then they talked on Monday about having a meeting after that 45 days with RTD to sort of talk through the issues, what the problems are, if there's something they need to remove from their final report, if there's something that they want to hear more about. They mentioned that they may invite some of the transportation leaders in the legislature or from the governor's office. I don't know that that was a final decision, and there's no time set for that, but just to let you know that all that is coming. There is one issue that, we tried to bring back the governance issues in particular. Ms. Johnson is leading on some of the other issues, performance metrics and things like that. But we talked before about the local service councils. Just this last week, the governance subcommittee started talking about the board and whether they wanted to recommend changes to the board. They had a presentation from North Highland, their consultants, about comparing us with other specific agencies. They pick several that they feel are similar in various ways, and looked at how many people they represent, how big the board is, how big the area is. They did misstate our population quite a bit in that presentation. The one suggestion that kind of came up was that maybe it needs to be smaller board. Maybe they should recommend that it be 9 or 11 people like that. Elise Jones was the first to say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And we reflected that as well. I don't think, and I express this, I'm not sure that there's any problem that, going through the legislature with a bill and then all the hassle of redoing it to get to 9 or 11 people is worth it. And there were a couple of mentions of things. One said that the board is too much in the weeds, not being strategic. And we pointed out, that we're in a strategic planning process. We're doing Reimagine RTD. We're working on the road to recovery, all of those things. And then the other piece that sometimes comes up is they say that we're too parochial and not looking at the district as a whole. And we also had several examples there. Just one, bringing in our new director, we are all working, our new GM CEO, we're all working towards, the good of the agency. Another example was that unanimously we voted to end for now contributing to the FISA, even though some directors are in areas with unfinished corridors. So there are actually any number of examples. I guess, kind of thinking this through and talking with various others, there was a group that used to vet board members, and it may be that suggesting that, and I know that Dr. Matt Kate's group does a forum and vets people, but I'm thinking that maybe suggesting that they encourage groups to vet and endorse board members might help. I also think somebody had raised to them, the small committees, and they seem to like that we are working on moving to small committees. There's no decision that's been made, but a couple of things that could make a difference potentially in how well we work, where it doesn't seem to us that changing the number and going through that effort would make any difference. So comments, suggestions, thoughts?
Okay. I'm seeing no one's hand up. Director Broom, your hand is still up. Did you have a comment?
No, I don't have one. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, second Vice Chair Geisinger. I think I like the question that was brought up of what problem are we trying to solve. I think I come back to that and kind of curious about, maybe if there's any more context you might offer there, or not is okay. I think the idea of potential, if the problem is, that there's not enough strategic thinking that's perhaps informed, then the idea of vetting candidates or having some group that vets candidates and makes recommendations would be prudent. There's probably a couple ways to solve some of it. I think the idea of smaller board doesn't totally resonate with me, just because we are quite large, and from what I understand of our history, we've been through, some push-pull of how large should we be, and should it be elected, should it not be elected, based on some areas across the 2,300 square mile district not feeling represented. So I don't know that the size is a problem. But again, I'm glad that the question came up of what problem are we trying to solve, and my encouragement or recommendation for the position of this board and our feedback is really getting to the heart of that question, and continuing to engage with the accountability committee on, make it very clear to us what you think is wrong, and then put forward some recommendations. If it is an expertise thing, then the idea of vetting, I think is an excellent recommendation. So that's all. I just wanted to lend my voice to that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to build on Director Geisinger and Director Davidson, and I really appreciate that one central core concept of what is the problem we're trying to solve. And I know that's already been mentioned twice before, but I really have to also mention that because I do understand that they do want to make recommendations, and they want, to be able to say, hey, these are some things that can make the system better. But, quite frankly, I don't see, that sort of thing making this better. We have a great board. I really appreciate every voice who's on this board. And I think there's some tremendous background and tremendous experience, and that we are elected. We should not be appointed. I really don't think an appointed board would really help at all. We go in the community. We listen. We're on Twitter. I mean, we are very accessible people, and I think an appointed board would be just potentially folks who are not as connected. And you lower the numbers, and there's going to be even fewer people who are connected and caring and wanting to know what's going on in the community. So I really appreciate Director Geisinger, your involvement with the accountability committee, and I know it can be a little frustrating being on the receiving end of some of these barbs that you're probably receiving, and I can tell you're handling it with grace, and I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Whitmore.
Well, Director Geisinger asked me to interject, and there's not much more I could add. She did a very holistic view of the meeting and, well, most of the meetings. The one aspect that I don't think was visited very much to Director Rosenthal's point is appointed versus elected, Lynn. And I think that had taken place when they looked at service councils and they looked at some earlier models way back maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but that was not brought up. And I think that's where you change the dynamic when you have wholly appointed or at-large elections or things of that nature. And to me, those appear to be solutions if there is a problem, but we've not really seen that identified. And there's one body that vets us, and that's our voters. And where do you go from there? So it'll be interesting to see how that conversation continues. But I would like to acknowledge Lynn's leadership. She's been tremendous and a good resource, and also since Deborah came on board, for her ability to interject when needed. It's been very helpful, and I think it's certainly helped our credibility with this group and all the onlookers. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Whitmore. And before I go to Director Deschel, I want to thank you for being our other ex officio member for the Accountability Committee, because I think you and Director First Vice Chair Geisinger have done a great job. I also want to thank the board because I try to get on as many, and I see a lot of you in the audience listening as well, and I so appreciate that, as well as our staff. So thank you.
And Lynn and I appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great.
Director Deschel.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Lynn, Director Geisinger, and Director Whitmore, and others who have joined. And I really do genuinely mean that. I don't attend the meetings, but I listen to them on YouTube because I just have a word conflict, and I don't know how you guys do it because there's no shortage of meetings. Substantively, I want to sort of elevate what I've heard, and I know Lynn, you and I, or Director Geisinger, you and I spoke earlier as well, but I think what I'm hearing from others, and what is certainly true for me, is when the committee comes back with their recommendations, if they could be tied to a problem statement and sort of an explanation of how their recommendation solves the problem, I think that would really aid us. Or I guess just to speak for myself, that would certainly aid me, and from head nods, it looks like others in really making our decisions. I also want to say I have a huge reservations around sort of one group endorsing a slate of candidates, if it's just one group, because that is and can be gatekeeping, especially for who holds power and who is historically holds power, and especially in a state where people place a lot of value on how long you've lived somewhere, and how many generations your family's been in Colorado, and who knows who, and all that sort of political back channel world. I appreciate you mentioning that about just having the groups who are already active in the space endorse candidates or have forums as appropriate, but really staying away from the gatekeeping of one group endorsing a slate. especially as it would probably be a nonprofit group. Not to say it's pay to play, but donations are donations.
Thank you. All right, Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lynn, Director Geisinger, will you provide these updates to us? And will there be an opportunity before we receive those recommendations to have a discussion as a board, or is this the venue and space in which you want our feedback?
The board official response is the 45 days after the final decision. It wasn't clear to me. They asked DRCOG to come up with a schedule because I don't think it was clear to the committee when they would have draft recommendations. And there are some that are starting to come together. I think, you know, the one on, well, I don't know that any of them have been adopted at this point. There's one on fares and passes. There's one on partnerships and local service councils that are probably, you know, there's some that are getting farther along than others, further along. And maybe I can check with DRCOG and see when they will have draft recommendations. But mostly, you know, I think that CEO Johnson and Director Whitmore and some of the other staff and I have been trying to give, you know, feedback along the way. For instance, they were looking at performance metrics, and some of them just didn't apply. There was one about keeping our, as Johnson pointed this out, there's one about keeping our escalators running, because that was one that was used at WMATA, where they have huge long escalators from Subway and we don't. You know, so we've been trying to give feedback along the way, and much of that's come from staff and from her. But so we can look at that. I'm not sure how far before the public hearing they'll have draft recommendations, but I assume it will be a little ways before, and we can get that. But our official responses come after the final report. But I do think it's worth giving feedback along the way to help avoid getting to those final decisions. So I will try to work with staff and the chair to see when we can get those.
Yeah, no, I do too, and that's the basis for my question is, what, as a board, where are the opportunities for us to engage and for you to provide that feedback to the accountability committee so that we know that it's going there, and seeing our input or our recommendations or our feedback come back to us and say, well, here are the ways in which the accountability committee has implemented or changed or tweaked what their recommendations might be. I asked that, Lynn, because my fear is that we get to the end of this, and because this process hasn't been co-created, is not incredibly collaborative, that we get to the end of the process and the board rejects the recommendations. Like, we talk about building trust all the time. I feel like that's what we're always talking about. And I would imagine that's probably not going to be a trust builder if folks spend a significant amount of time getting to these recommendations and then they come back to us and there's something that we can't live with.
Yeah, I don't know, Ms. Johnson, do you have some input there as to what we might want to do? Input along the way.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the earnest dialogue, because as I have shared, as you know, First Chair Geisinger, that I had concerns relative to not receiving recommendations in a format that I'm accustomed to relative to anybody putting forward recommendations and having specified timelines. I do appreciate the comments put forward by Director Deschel in reference to a problem statement, because I too, and you guys know that I say this all the time, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? As we talked about our strategic planning efforts and we talk about grow ridership, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? So in light of all that, I do think there needs to be a process put forward, recognizing that we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago what I opined on relative to like the state audit, for instance, putting forward, staff's responses, having an opportunity for the board to review. I don't think that's any different here as we go forward. So recognizing when we receive that, there needs to be a timeline that's specified. And I believe wholeheartedly that all board members should opine, because with you all having the auspices to oversee the organization, we need to ensure that we're putting valuable information forward. And I'd be remiss not to say this in this public session, recognizing that when there are elements put forward, it seems as if our peer agencies change each and every time there's a subject matter. Case in point about governance, recognizing there's 2 other boards in the country that are directly elected by a constituency. However, those 2 agencies, being the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District and the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, were not included in peer agencies, begs questions. When you're looking at escalator and elevator, you made reference to VOMATA, keeping in mind that organization has the 10 longest escalators in the Western Hemisphere. And they have in excess of 600 aspects of vertical transportation. How is that germane to us? And so as we talk about what we're solving for, I think it's incumbent that this is outlined in such a way. And what I would offer up, perhaps you and Director Whitmore could put forward, on behalf of the board, these elements that we're describing, so there's no confusion about what it is that's been memorialized relative to what our expectations are as an organization relative to any type of recommendations that are put forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe what I can do is, I think what they've said is, well, we don't have, they still haven't voted on these proposals, but the proposals are taking shape at this point. And, I guess I can talk with our CEO and we got so many things going on, but, we could get them out to people. And I don't know if there's an opportunity for us to come together and discuss them, where people can give us feedback. Some people have been, attending or watching them later and giving feedback along the way. But I'll see what we can pull together in terms of some of the recommendations that they're moving toward. And
I appreciate that. It's very helpful to know what the expectation is. And so if the expectation is that we watch the meetings afterwards and then provide you with feedback, that's good to know. So that's essentially what I'm asking is, what is the expectation for us as board members, and where's the opportunity? Director Geisinger, you said that they're being shaped, for us to shape those together with input from, our general manager, staff, and board members as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I have Director Tisdale next, but your hand is down, Mr. Tisdale. Did you want to speak?
Well, I'm sorry. My laptop seems to develop a mind of its own after so many hours of being on live streaming like this, so I apologize for that. Further to the comments made by Director Deschel and others, I think it's important to note that the Accountability Committee, look at that word, Accountability Committee, is really acting as a sort of super auditor of the RTD. And I think it would be appropriate for the committee to follow the same standards that we had so carefully laid out tonight for us regarding audit function. Tell us what the problem is. Tell us what the evidence shows. Share your work papers. Substantiate your conclusions and your recommendations. Is that too much to ask? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, now, before I move forward, Director Broom, your hand is still up, your virtual hand. Did you have another comment, sir?
Yes, I got it down, and then I thought of a question that I had.
Okay, please.
Have we heard what position that the CML and Colorado counties have taken on the transportation bill?
Director Geisinger, I'll send it to you.
I do not know. We can find out.
Then the other thing is, there's some aspects of this bill that appears to me that wouldn't pass constitutional muster. And if they strike down, for example, the fact that they're going to raise the gas tax, but they're not going to call it a tax, they're going to call it a fee. I mean, that smells to high heaven. If that gets struck down, does the whole bill go down as a result of that, or what happens?
I doubt it. Director Rosenthal might be able to speak to that, but I think that it would that they would segment it in that situation. Interestingly, Mayor Suthers, when he spoke the other day, who's a self-described conservative Republican, I think I mentioned this last week, but he said, as a former U.S. attorney, he feels very comfortable that these fees will be upheld as fees. So it's his opinion, but we'll see.
It's sure quacking away.
Thank you. Does that conclude your questions and comments, Director Broom?
It does, and I'll try to get my hand down.
Okay. Director Rosenthal, I see your hand up.
Thank you for that second bite at the apple on this. And as I understand it, the fee issue versus tax has gone to the court and it's been upheld. So, and I see what the legislature was trying to do with that bill is to say, how do we build something that's bipartisan and that we can get everybody behind? So I do get what they were trying to do. But to really just 2 quick points to add to some really good points from lots of directors, but particularly Deschel and Lewis and Geisinger and Whitmore. So my sense is we really should perhaps send them a letter. Speaking of letters that we're thinking about sending, but send them a letter with some ideas, kind of building on what Director Lewis said. So if they're going to send us some recommendations, let's give them some recommendations that they can send back to us that we know that we could possibly adopt. Hopefully, it's in a form that we we can stomach and such. I think that's fair for us to have that dialogue rather than just unilateral. So, for example, I think there was some discussion on adding board members. And I know staff is probably having a coronary right now. They're like, no more board members. But even if they're ex officio, like the head of CDOT and the head of DRCOG or a representative from those agencies, to provide their perspectives, if they're voting or not voting, just let's have that discussion at least. We heard from one of the auditors talking about how they have 25 board members in New York. And, while they have a lot more ridership than we do, we have a lot more geography than they do. So, it's just, so I do like that idea. How do we give them some ideas? I don't mind, I think those are good. On the vetting concept, I didn't get to address that. And I know that we'll have this opportunity to speak a lot more to these ideas as they come forward. But I share the concern that, we'd have an organization, that would basically say, you're good, you're not good. And possibly, with all due respect to all of us who are now incumbents, that would not support a challenger. I mean, we have Director Bouquet, who was a challenger and he was elected. Not to say anything negative about the previous director, who was a great guy, and I think he did a great work. But at the same time, what if he had supported the director and not Director Bouquet? So you see where this gets really sticky, and so I really think that is something I think we should be very cautious about and supporting. Thank you.
All right. So first Vice Chair Geisinger, you've gotten a lot of feedback here. Is this helpful for you?
It is helpful. And actually in a conversation with Director Deschel today, I would not recommend any group that would do the vetting, but maybe that if that's a concern, that they encourage that to happen. And that could, happen from the LCCs, which represent, the aging and the low income and some of the nonprofit. It could happen from the chambers. And then it's just a matter of getting more information out, but hopefully that would avoid some of those concerns. But I think we find ourselves often saying, what's the problem? I think that really, here's what I would suggest is that I try to get the draft recommendations and bring them back. It's important in terms of, you know, whether they're going to give us their explanation and their substantiate with the evidence and those things. It's not our committee, you know. And I think that, as I said before, having Ms. Johnson there and Doug McLeod and others, and has been very helpful in terms of giving feedback. But I guess what I would suggest is I try to get some of those draft recommendations, get them to people, and we decide how we want to, if there's a time that we can address those. I can work with the chair and the CEO, unless others have recommendations, see if we can have a time to look at those in particular, or people can just give us comments.
Thank you. And First Vice Chair Geisinger, I guess what I'm going away with from what I've heard collectively is we need to see the draft recommendations before they actually submit them so that it's a smooth transition, number one. And number two, they really need to show us the problem statement, what it is, what's the evidence, and what is the recommendation based on that? Because I think otherwise it's conjecture on certain people's parts, and we want to, we don't want to deal with that at all. I think that that would really help streamline the process, particularly since this committee is slated to end on what, July 1 or July 30? I can't remember, but it's coming right up.
July 1. So June 13th will be their public hearing, and June 28th, I think they're hoping to finalize recommendations.
So I would just remind the board that tonight is May 11th. So we're talking about a very short period of time. So if we call you guys to say, hey, we need to come together pretty fast, answer our calls so we can get it done, because I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done in the next couple of weeks pretty fast. Director Whitmore.
Just one other short conversation that took place. There was and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Geisinger, but there was several that mentioned follow-up meetings with this board after the recommendation. So it might be part of that process. I'm not sure, but it's not been completely described to us on the timeline. But I think there's follow-up desire by the committee after the work has been completed. So just know that may be coming our way this summer.
Okay.
Is that correct, Lynn?
Yeah, that's right. After we have the 45 days to respond, they're talking about, they just came up a couple Monday, yesterday. That, yeah, seems like a while ago. That they would want to get together, you know, with RTD and on places that we disagree, you know. And this is one area, well, there are, you know, there's some areas that I think we will disagree, but I think that they really are, once, you know, the fact that we've been engaging with them, that our CEO has been engaging with them and some of the staff and all, I think that they are recognizing that what they're making are recommendations. You know, we talked in terms of the performance metrics, that we're going through a strategic planning process, and those performance metrics really need to come from that process. You know, push comes to shove, it's hard to say on specific issues where they'll end up, but I'll see where we can get in terms of draft recommendations for the board to start taking a look at, and see what we can do in terms of getting response. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other new business to come before the board? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is anyone opposed to adjourning this meeting? Let me start there. Okay, hearing none, 9:08. We are adjourned. Thank you all for being here this evening and for this discussion. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Good job.
Thank you.
Good night.